Chapter 129. Yang Chendong was also sizing up Princess Shangda. When he saw her gaze fall on the jade pendant he carried with him, his heart tightened. This was a waist pendant with the words peace engraved on it. It wasn't very valuable, but it was given to him by his father when he was 1 year old. It had an extraordinary meaning. Princess, this was given to me by my father. This. What? Dong Shuai just said that everything here belongs to the Zhu family and that we can take it as we wish. Are you going back on your words now? Princess Shangda said sternly. Her face, which was originally pleasant to look at, changed in an instant, giving people a lot of pressure. This pressure obviously couldn't scare Yang Chendong, but it reminded him of her identity. Indeed, they were all from the Zhu family. None of them were easy to get along with. They changed their faces faster than flipping a book. Not wanting to be a busybody, he immediately took off his waist pendant and handed it over with both hands. Since the princess likes it, you can have it. Haha, that's more like it. As if she really liked this waist pendant, Princess Shangda stretched out her jade-like hands to receive it. Then, she regained the innocent expression of a girl. All right, this princess has helped you solve your problem. Asking for a waist pendant from you isn't considered bullying me. Ha ha ha, let's go. Princess Shangda left just like that, not staying for long. She probably knew that with her current status, staying too long in the Yang family village would easily attract criticism. Although she wasn't afraid of public opinion, it was better to avoid as much trouble as possible. The princess left, leaving Yang Chendong alone in the side hall, deep in thought. The third princess's sudden appearance and quick departure made him a little uncertain. If he had to pinpoint her intentions, it would be that she had only taken a waist pendant. He didn't believe that a spoiled princess would care so much about an ordinary waist pendant. Even when Xiao Yin and Lady Shui appeared in the side hall, hand in hand, Yang Chendong still couldn't figure out what was going on. On the other hand, the two women seemed to be aware of his predicament. Because Xiao Yin had been with Yang Chendong for a long time, she was the most courageous. She bluntly said, "Young master, I'm afraid the princess has fallen for you." What? Hearing this, Yang Chendong was shocked. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it, but that he didn't think it existed at all. Although information was not so developed at that time, the matter of him falling in love with Hu Yin, the daughter of the Hu clan, would not be a secret in front of the emperor. Since the emperor knew about this matter, it was impossible for him to marry the princess to him. One had to know that according to the customs of that time, when a princess married a man of lower status, her status was even higher than that of a concubine. Not only that, as the emperor's son-in-law, he could only have this one woman in his life. Even the servant girl to warm the bed had to be chosen from the princess's own dowry. At that time, this was a tyrannical treaty for men. However, if one wanted to marry the princess, one had to pay a price in order to obtain benefits. Speaking of which, this was very fair. However, this kind of fairness might be useful for a destitute scholar with no power or influence. But whether it was power or money, what did Yang Chendong lack? How could he possibly marry only the princess and restrict his own freedom? The emperor should be aware of this. In addition, for the sake of Hu Ming and Hu Zhangning, he probably wouldn't have this idea. Thus, he took the initiative to omit it. Now that the two women had mentioned it, he carefully recalled Princess Shangda's attitude towards him. Only then did he realize. Princess Shangda's attitude did change a lot, but that was just her nature. The spoiled her would still act coquettishly in front of Zhu Qizhen and ask for benefits. In front of others, she was even more unscrupulous. As for the waist ornament, it was just a token of love. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong's expression changed again and again. He sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "This can't be done. Young master, since this can't be done, we have to think of a way." Xiao Yin and Lady Shui both stepped forward, looking concerned. They could not be concerned. If the young master really married the princess, what would they do? If the princess was unreasonable and didn't allow them to stay in the Yang family, they could only leave. At that time, they wouldn't even have a place to cry. For their own rights, they had to do something. Yes, the young master will think of a way. However, we have to do something right now. Yang Chendong's first thought was to immediately send the betrothal gifts to the Hu family. Then, he prepared to ask for the name. Although this situation was complicated, The process that had to be walked through was not something that could be omitted. But as soon as the thought appeared, Yang Chendong rejected it. Not for any other reason, but because this year was a particularly important year. Before the changes in the Tumu castle happened, he couldn't do anything big. Once he provoked someone and caused unnecessary trouble, it would be bad if it led to changes. Fortunately, Princess Shangda was still young. Moreover, she was only testing the waters today. Even if she wanted to ask the emperor to grant her marriage, she still needed an opportunity. Now that he was resting at home in the name of being sick, it probably wasn't the best time to grant her marriage. Of course, the reason why Yang Chendong was so confident about this was because of Wang Zhan. He and Wang Zhan were in a cooperative relationship. They had agreed to pay him a large sum of money next year. Before the money was in his hands, he definitely didn't want to become the emperor's son-in-law and establish a connection with the imperial family. If Zhu Qizhan had such a thought, Wang Zhan would do everything possible to stop him. This was equivalent to buying time and opportunities for himself. As for after the big event, no matter what the situation was, at least Yang Chendong wouldn't be as passive as he was now. When the time came, he could find an opportunity to act first and report later. At that time, even if the emperor knew, he couldn't let Princess Changda marry a married man and share a man with others. With a plan in mind, Yang Chendong regained his confidence. Okay, you don't need to tidy up here. Call Tiger's mane in. I have something to ask him. Seeing that Yang Chendong seemed to be thinking about something, Xiao Yin and Lady Shui looked at each other and left. They knew that all their hopes could only be placed on the young master. They also believed that the young master would be able to solve the problem. This came from a kind of trust. At the same time, it also showed that women in ancient times were not independent. Tang Tong went back and brought back the news that Yangtze was likely to escape to Jianing Prefecture. She also brought back Princess Shangda's attitude. Seeing that Tang Tong came back empty-handed, Qian Sengbao's face was cold and he was even prepared to hold her accountable. But when he heard that even Princess Shangda came out and said those words, he knew that it was unwise to make an issue out of Yang Chendong being beaten up by Yangtze. Since there were no benefits, he didn't want to be involved in it. He immediately arranged for a little eunuch to pass a message to the magazine king, saying that the criminal was on the run and was being arrested. He then threw the matter aside. The magazine king was originally angry because of the incident with the guard captain, Tuj. When the eunuch passed the message, he was even angrier. But soon his attention was diverted. It was not for any other reason, but because the Wallace spy in the capital of the Great Ming dynasty had contacted the buyer who could buy high-yield potatoes. Compared to a guard captain being beaten up, high-yield potatoes were more important to the fate of the Walla. The magazine king put all his attention on the potato matter and even arranged for his most trusted subordinate, Tuj, to handle this matter. In his words, if this matter was done well, it would be a great merit. When the time came, he would also have a merit in front of his brother, Yesen. At that time, whether he would be promoted or rewarded, it wouldn't be a problem. Now that there was something to do, Tuj temporarily put aside the grudges in his hands. He brought 4 skilled subordinates and a spy to guide the group of 6 to meet with the potato seller and make a deal. Perhaps in order to gain the trust of the seller first provided 2 full bags of potato seeds. When these things were sent to the relay station, the magazine king personally checked them. After confirming that there were no mistakes, the meeting was arranged. The seller seemed to be a very careful person. He arranged for the meeting to be in a small courtyard in a remote alley. Because of the location, very few people from the warden's office paid attention to this place. On the surface, there seemed to be no problem with the safety. However, this was still a transaction in the capital of the Great Ming dynasty. If something went wrong and the Ming dynasty took notice of their plot, it would be a big problem. Tuagu was in favor of trading in such a remote location. But for safety, he still made 2 preparations. First, he didn't have much money on him. This way, even if the other party wanted to do something, without enough benefits, they wouldn't easily make a move. Second, he assigned his 4 subordinates to the surroundings of the alley. If there was any trouble, the 4 of them would be able to call out to each other from a distance. He didn't believe that there was someone who could silently deal with his 4 subordinates. As long as one of them noticed that something was wrong, they could shout and attract the attention of others. After arranging everything, Tuj brought the spy to the small alley. After observing for a while and confirming that there weren't any accidents, they entered the empty courtyard. Tuj was confident that he had arranged everything perfectly. However, he didn't know that there was something called a sniper rifle. He also didn't know that this thing could be installed with a silencer that he had never heard of before. This silencer could guarantee that it could take a person's life from 1,000 meters away as easily as taking something out of a pocket. Just as Tuagu was about to enter the small courtyard, Dao Xiao and the other 10 members of the second guard squad had already arrived. They were carefully inspecting the guns and equipment. Chapter 130. The so-called seller was actually someone from the security bureau in disguise. Their purpose was to frame the Walla's envoy. Offense was the best defense. If you don't want others to keep an eye on you, an excellent way is to make the opponent unable to pay attention to you. If you're already in trouble, how would you have time to keep an eye on others? This was the task Yang Chendong arranged for Tiger's Mane. After receiving the task, he passed it to Yang San and asked him to arrange the details. As a secret organization, Yang San and his men were much more professional than Walla's spies. This was not only because they were better trained, but also because they were rich and well-equipped. With the advantage in all aspects, it was only natural that Tile's spies had always been under the control of the Security Bureau. To lure them out and give them something that could move them was not difficult at all. On the contrary, it was very smooth. What was even more unexpected was the appearance of Tuagu. This person had once slandered the 6th young master in front of the Yang family manor's gate. Everyone had long wanted to kill this person to vent their anger. However, considering the other party's identity, they did not make a move. This time, he took the initiative to come to them. How could they let him go? Not long after Tuagu and the Wallace spy entered the small courtyard, Yang San appeared with another subordinate of the Security Bureau. There was also a carriage with many bags on it. It was impossible to see the appearance of the bags in the dark. However, considering the items to be traded, it was obvious what was in the bags. Under the attention of the 4 Wallace guards, Yang San walked into the small courtyard and saw Tuagu, who had arrived first. "You have a lot of potatoes in your hands?" Seeing the person who came at the agreed time and saw that the other party came in a carriage, Tuagu was satisfied but still asked cautiously.
Yes.
Yang San's face was indifferent, like an emotionless humanoid machine. Since the person in front of him dared to look down on the 6th young master, it would not be an exaggeration to cut him into pieces. However, considering that Dao Xiao and the others still needed some time to complete their task, he forcefully suppressed the thought of attacking and continued to deal with Tuagu. Yang San's attitude was so cold that Tuagu felt a trace of displeasure from the bottom of his heart. However, considering that he was not here to make friends but to make a deal, he suppressed his dissatisfaction and asked again, "Who are you? Why were there so many potato seeds? As far as I know, this thing hasn't been popularized in the Ming dynasty yet. The seeds of this thing should be very precious. Are you an officer?" Yang San answered Tuj's question unhurriedly. "No." Tugger shook his head. He didn't understand why the other party would ask such a question. Instead, it was the Valle spy who came with him who shook his head bitterly when he heard this. This general's bodyguard captain didn't know anything about the secret battlefront at all. How could he ask about the other party's background? It was impossible for the other party to tell him. As expected, Yang San used a gaze filled with disdain to look at Tuagu and said, "Since you aren't an official, why are you asking me these questions? You really are an idiot." Tuagu suddenly realized that he had said something wrong. However, the other party directly called him an idiot and angered him. He glared and said with a fierce expression, "You dare to scold me?" Just as Tuagu was about to flip out, the Security Bureau agent who had been tidying up the carriage walked into the small courtyard. According to the previous agreement, once this person entered the courtyard, it meant that the Walla agents guarding outside had all been eliminated. A strange smile flashed across Yang San's face. "So what if I scold you? I still want to kill you." After saying this, a small crossbow appeared in Yang San's hand. At this moment, he was aiming it at the angry Tuagu who was about to draw his sword. "Let's talk nicely. Let's talk nicely." Seeing Yang San take out a weapon, the Walla agent felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. He immediately tried to ease the atmosphere with a smile. How could Yang San, who already had the intention to kill, stop his killing intent because of these words? A cold smile flashed across his face. Let's talk nicely? However, it's too late to say anything now. From the moment you entered this small courtyard, you were already destined to be dead. At the same time as his voice fell, his right index finger moved and pulled the trigger on the crossbow. Under the force of the spring mechanism, an arrow flew through the air and shot into Tuagur's chest. At the same time, outside the small courtyard, hidden snipers simultaneously fired their bullets into the head of Tuagur's subordinate, who was completely unaware of the impending death. Among them, 3 bullets hit the middle of his eyebrows, while 1 missed and only hit the forehead. However, the powerful lethality still took his life in the first instant. The pitiful Tuagur still maintained his posture of drawing his sword. He had an overbearing appearance, as if he wanted to take the lead. He didn't know that the people he had arranged outside had all been wiped out. Furthermore, when he thought about how the other party attacked without the slightest hesitation, how was this a trade? It was clear that they were here to kill him. When Yang San made his move, his subordinates also took out the same crossbow and aimed it at the Walla spy. If you want to live, don't shout. Otherwise, you will end up like him. The Walla spy, who had been scared silly by the scene in front of him, was already stunned. In the end, his mission was just to gather information. He was also trained on how to hide himself. His skills were only average. Now that even Tuagur, who was extremely good at fighting, was killed without being able to fight back, what else could he do? In order to save his life, the spy stood there obediently and allowed the people from the security bureau to tie him up tightly. Even his mouth was stuffed tightly. There was another sound of footsteps outside the courtyard. Dao Xiao led the second team to clean up the 4 Walla guards who were hiding in the dark and carry their bodies inside. Let's get to work. Create a scene and bring him back alive. He must know a lot of Walla's secrets. A sinister smile flashed across Yang San's face. Perhaps it was because of his work, but he had become much more sinister. Even in the security bureau, few people dared to interact with him too much. They seemed to be afraid of the actual leader of the security bureau. Half an hour later, a big fire suddenly appeared outside the courtyard. The fire attracted the soldiers of the 5 cities' warden's office. When they put out the fire with all their might, they saw the scene in the courtyard clearly. A few men wearing Walla Guards uniforms were lying dead on the ground. In front of them, there were many scattered potatoes. This matter involved the Walla Guards. The 5 cities' warden's office quickly reported this matter. Not long after, the Eastern Faction Warden's office and the embroidered uniform guards men arrived one after another. The leader was the Qinhu official, Tang Tong. After he recognized Tuagur's identity at a glance, his eyes flashed with anger. Another half an hour later, the magazine king, who was still waiting for news at the relay station, looked outside uneasily. Suddenly, the door of the courtyard he was resting in was pushed open from the outside. Then, a group of embroidered uniform guard rushed in with torches. Not good. Instinctively, the magazine king turned around and took the scimitar that was hanging on the wall. When he turned around, Tang Tong and a few other embroidered uniform guards men had already rushed into the room. Emissary, are you still going to resist? Looking at the magazine king's current appearance, Tang Tong sneered. What are you doing? Since you know that I am an emissary, why are you treating me like this? Aren't you afraid that the Ming dynasty will fall out with the Walla? The magazine king relied on his identity as an emissary to threaten them. I don't know about the matter between the Ming dynasty and the Walla, but now there is evidence that your guard captain has been buying prohibited potatoes everywhere. Now that he has been caught red-handed, I'll have to trouble the emissary to come with us and explain clearly. Tang Tong's eyes were full of threat. If the magazine king dared to resist, he would take action. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. Although he knew that Tuagur had messed up the matter, the magazine king still had some confidence when he thought about how he was the emissary of the Walla. Okay, I'll come with you and see what you have to say. The magazine king put away his scimitar, snorted coldly, and strode in front of Tang Tong. Tuagur was killed and the magazine king was arrested. This was Yang Qindong's revenge and also successfully diverted the attention of the magazine king. Now that the magazine king couldn't even protect himself, how could he have the time to pay attention to young Chendong? Regrettably, the periodical king was, after all, the emissary of Tile. Especially after he found out about Tugger's death, he pushed all the blame onto the dead and complained about the injustice he had suffered. Without direct evidence, naturally, no one could do anything to the magazine king. However, this matter directly caused the court to be disgusted with the Walla. In particular, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, threw out the problem of the large number of people in the Walla's diplomatic group. When the potato had just appeared, Wang Zhuo had suggested to the emperor that such a good thing should not be allowed to spread. Otherwise, when those foreign countries had enough food, they would raise their soldiers and horses. From there, they would have the ability to cause trouble for the Ming dynasty. This time, the Walla actually wanted to take the potatoes back, which could be considered as touching his reverse scale. In the court, he said that according to the rules of the court, the number of people in the diplomatic group should be limited to 50 people. However, this time, the Walla actually sent a group of 3,000 people. Just the food and drink alone cost a lot of money every day. It was really like a stone that stirred up 1,000 ripples. When the other officials heard about this, they all had a shocked expression. Zhu Qizhen, who was sitting high on the dragon throne, had a blank expression on his face at first, then it turned into anger. He looked at Wang Zhan, who was standing beside him, and asked, "Teacher, is this really true?" Chapter 131. Wang Zhan was one of the first to know about this, but considering the benefits he received from the Walla before, he wanted to minimize the problem and let them leave. But now that it was exposed in the imperial court, some words had to be said. Replying to the emperor, the actual number is only around 2,500 people. 3,000 is a false number. Just as Wang Zhan had said, this time, Vala had indeed sent out 2,500 tributary envoys. In order to receive more rewards, they had falsely reported 3,000 people. It was normal for the Walla to falsely claim rewards. Because Wang Zhan colluded with the Walla and accepted bribes from Yesen, he pretended not to know. But this time, the emperor took the initiative to ask, and in front of the civil and military officials, he could not hide anything. Good. Are they here to pay tribute, or to ask for something? After hearing Wang Zhan's answer, Zhu Qizhen's face became very ugly, and he announced in the imperial court, "Teacher, since you have received the previous diplomatic groups, this time I will leave it to you to solve. I don't care what method you use, but in short, it is not so easy to take advantage of me." Seeing Zhu Qizhen angry, Wang Zhan immediately said, "Please rest assured, Emperor, this subject knows what to do." After the court was adjourned, Wang Zhan did not treat the king of the periodical in the same amiable manner as before. Instead, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to give out rewards according to the number of people who were present. He also rashly reduced the price of the Valago horses by 4/5, paying Valeso only 1/5 of what he had asked for. This caused the periodical king's wish not to be fulfilled, and he angrily returned. Not only that, when the large diplomatic group returned, they were strictly inspected, and all the things they brought were searched. Rummaging through the books on the grounds of preventing illegal items made the magazine king lose face. After the angry periodical king returned to the Walla, he reported to Yesen with exaggerated details. When Yesen heard this, he was furious and immediately gathered the army, using the Ming dynasty's reduction of rewards as an excuse to split the army into 4 and attack the Ming dynasty, personally leading a large army to attack Dadong. They were already prepared to attack the Ming dynasty, and this time, they had a suitable excuse. For a time, the border area was filled with the flames of war, and alarms were constantly sounding. Walla's cavalry was ferocious, and they quickly advanced to the south. The Ming dynasty soldiers guarding the northwest were defeated several times, and they hurriedly requested reinforcements from the capital. Walla's betrayal and the start of the war. Once the news reached the capital, it caused a huge commotion. For a moment, they were all guessing which general the emperor would send as reinforcements to conquer Walla. While everyone was guessing, one person's heart beat wildly. He thought that his chance to become famous in the world had come. This person was the head eunuch of the imperial palace, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Wang Zhan. Even though Wang Zhan who could be said to be able to cover the sky with one hand, could be said to have absolute power at that time. Although some people had no choice but to rely on him because of his power, he was still a eunuch in the end. Other than his trusted aides, no one knew how to secretly curse him. If Wang Zhan were to fall from power one day, the first to attack him would be those who relied on him. Furthermore, Wang Zhan might not always be able to cover the sky with one hand, because his power came from Emperor Zhu Qizhen. As long as Zhu Qizhen no longer trusted him and was suspicious of him, he only needed to casually say a few words to make Wang Zhan lose the entire game. No matter how much power he had, he could not jump out of Zhu Qizhen's 5 fingers. This was what Wang Zhan was worried about. If he wanted to become an evergreen tree, he had to truly grasp the Ming dynasty's military power and reach the peak of power. To achieve this, it was far from enough to arrange a few trusted aides. Only by leading the great Ming dynasty's army to victory could he truly establish his prestige in the army. For this reason, he decided to urge Zhu Qizhen to personally lead the northern expedition to Walla. If he succeeded, as the leader, he would naturally have great merits. At that time, he would have many opportunities to touch the military power. Once this desire appeared in his heart, he had a feeling that he could not retreat. His whole body felt as if it was on fire, making him unable to sit still for a moment. Where is His Majesty now? Wang Zhan's heart was in turmoil. He really wanted to ask Zhu Qizhen to go to war, so he asked a little eunuch beside him. Replying to eunuch Wang, "His Majesty is resting with the Empress." "Good. Let's go see His Majesty." Wang Zhan stood up, tidied up his sleeves, and walked straight to the rear palace with firm steps. At this time, Zhu Qizhen was resting in Empress Qian's palace. His complexion was not very good. Vala's violation of the border was somewhat out of his expectations and caught him off guard. When he saw that more and more requests for help were coming in from the border, he decided to leave the Palace of Heavenly Purity and go to the Empress Palace to relax. As for how to deal with this matter and who to send, the important officials would probably come up with a plan. This was one of the benefits of being the emperor. If he ran into problems or problems he didn't want to deal with, he could just toss them to someone else. Empress Qian was extremely virtuous and virtuous. When she saw that Zhu Qizhen's mood wasn't too good, she had all the maids and eunuchs leave the palace. She was the only one accompanying the emperor to rest in his chambers. She even suggested that if the emperor was too bored, he should take a trip to the immortal abode to relax. Zhu Qizhen was somewhat moved by the empress' suggestion. The immortal abode had been open for more than half a year now, and there was always an endless supply of delicious food and fun things to do inside. When he heard people talk about it in the past, he would always look forward to it. However, because he was the emperor, leaving the palace would cause too much of a ruckus. That was why he had always suppressed this thought. Now that the empress was so supportive of him, he was truly moved. Empress Qian was worried about Zhu Qizhen's health after seeing how distressed he was, so she made this suggestion. When she saw that the emperor was actually moved, she smiled sweetly. "If your majesty wishes to go, you can disguise yourself as a commoner. However, you must bring more people with you. Your safety is still very important." Yes, the empress is absolutely right. How about this? We will immediately call General Fanzhong over and have him arrange for more people to protect us. Zhu Qizhen couldn't wait any longer. There was a trace of urgency in his voice. The emperor issued a decree, and General Fanzhong quickly brought over 100 Huban soldiers to prepare for the emperor's departure. It was at this time that Wang Zhan arrived. He was dressed in official robes. Only the eunuchs who served the emperor were allowed to wear such clothing. As soon as Wang Zhan arrived, Zhu Qizhen happily said, "Teacher, immediately change into a set of casual clothes and accompany us to the immortal abode. Let's see what new delicacies they have." Originally, Wang Zhan had been thinking about how to broach the subject of his personal expedition with Zhu Qizhen. Now that the emperor wanted to go to the immortal abode, it was absolutely quiet, and there were even private rooms there. It was much more convenient to discuss matters. He immediately agreed. As he went to change his clothes, he also arranged for someone to notify the last-ranked eunuch, Mao Mu, and have him notify Yang Qindong as soon as possible so that he could make the necessary arrangements. Yang Village. Lung Feng from Crimson City had arrived. He was personally led by Xiao Feng, who was already a battalion commander. Bai Zhua, the captain of the Phantom Sniper Squad, had also arrived with them. There were a total of 20 members, 10 of them snipers and 10 of them observers. When Xiao Feng arrived, he was immediately called to the study to give a detailed report of the situation on Little Ryukyu Island. From Xiao Feng's words, Yang Chendong learned that the majority of Little Ryukyu Island was already under the control of the Yang clan. Only the central northern region had not been recovered. This was because the population was too small, and they needed time to digest it. Otherwise, they would have been able to take down the entire Ryukyu Island in one go. Currently, on Little Ryukyu Island, the number of local aboriginals and the commoners that Deng Maoqi had taken away during his uprising added up to about 400,000 people. Among them, there were only 4,000 people who had truly passed the various tests to become members of Lung Feng. There were 2,000 in the army and 2,000 in the navy, for a total of 40 companies. According to the statistics of 4 companies per battalion, there were 5 battalions in the navy and 5 battalions in the army. As for the auxiliary soldiers and the children's regiment, there were close to 20,000 people. Very good. There's no need to rush the matter of Lung Feng changing from a battalion to a regiment. After listening to Xiao Feng's account, Yang Chendong's face was filled with satisfaction. Tall buildings were built from the ground up. The foundation was often the most important. If the organization of the army was messed up at the beginning, it would take a lot of effort to correct it later on. Rather than spending a lot of effort to reorganize it later on, it was better to lay a good foundation from the beginning and take one step at a time. After asking about the development of the army, he asked about the progress of the factories. He even asked about Yu Qian and Shan Yu's situation. According to Xiao Feng, the development and construction of the various cities in the factory were being carried out in an orderly manner. Other than the ships that went to the west to search for rubber and the power plant that could not be started, the other factories had entered the planning stage of development. The various goods that they produced were already self-sufficient and could be considered for expansion. Yu Qian and Shan Yu's situation was also very stable. When they first arrived at Resin City, they were shocked by the technological development and everything that they saw. As they gained a deeper understanding, they showed great interest in these developments and even took the initiative to participate in some things. However, when Xiao Feng said, however, he was still carefully observing Yang Chendong's expression. If you have something to say, just say it. Yang Chendong smiled. He knew that as the system grew stronger, the gap between his relationship with the people under him would also grow bigger. However, he still wanted to hear more of the truth. He did not want to lie to his superiors.
Yes.
Xiao Feng quickly responded, then said, however, when they found out that all the changes were related to the 6th young master and had nothing to do with the Ming dynasty, they showed strong resistance. They put down the work at hand and stayed in the house that we arranged for them. Chapter 132. Yu Qian and Shan Yu were officials of the great Ming dynasty. One was a self-proclaimed Wen Tianxiang, while the other was an imperial censor. They were both people with integrity. Yang Chendong had long thought that the other party would not accept the changes in Crimson City so easily, especially since it was not under the management of the great Ming dynasty. There would be resistance and incomprehension, but these two people were people who valued the country more than the king. As long as they saw that the ones benefiting were the common people, their thoughts would eventually change. It was just a matter of how long it would take. Yang Chendong firmly believed that time could change a person. Oh, they've been staying in the room all this time? Yang Chendong's smile was written all over his face. He was not surprised by the two people's uncooperative attitude. Yes and no. At first, they stayed in the room, but the 6th young master also knew that even in the room, the facilities inside were completely different from the Ming dynasty. In addition, after their relatives were safely sent back, they began to appear on the streets again. At first, they did not speak much, but when I received the order to come to the capital, they had already made friends with many of the common people in the city. It could be seen that the smiles on their faces were getting more and more. Hee, this is a good phenomenon. When he heard this, Yang Chendong was already certain that these two people would definitely be used by him. The only difference was the length of time. Everything caused by little Lioli was developing steadily. This was where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. There was no need to talk about advancing. If there were any accidents, he would have a place to retreat. So, what did he not dare to do? Next, he had to consider how to make a good wall offense. Should he let the Tumu fortress incident continue? Yang Chenong knew that the Ming dynasty's elites were all lost in the Tumu fortress incident. From then on, the Ming dynasty began to weaken. But even so, under the efforts of many people, it still persisted for a very long time. But in the end, the Ming dynasty was defeated in the end. It was defeated because of internal strife. If not for the fact that the power was too scattered, the aristocrats, scholars, and eunuchs were holding each other back, and sometimes they could not even carry out the emperor's orders, how could there be the possibility of the Manchurian Tatars entering the pass? And how could there be the scene of the magnificent China being bullied and humiliated 300 years later? Originally, he had been considering whether he should take action to change history. However, when he thought of the actions of the Ming dynasty's monarch and the tragic history in the future, he shook his head and completely gave up on this idea. Forget it. If there were no elites, then so be it. The deaths of a few people in exchange for a happy life for more people. Especially since China was able to stand at the top of the world, it was appropriate no matter how one looked at it. Young master, Eunuch Mao sent word that Eunuch Wangjin sent word that His Majesty is going to the immortal abode. He asked for you to make arrangements in advance. Tiger's mane appeared in the study and reported the news he'd just received. All right, I understand. Yang Chendong's expression froze for a moment. Then, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. It was about time. This Wang Zhan was going to make a move to dissuade Zhu Qizhen. Immortal abode. Yang Chendong's sudden arrival caused Mu Lily, who was on duty, to be extremely nervous. Yang Xi's matter had obviously been suppressed by Dong Shuai. Now, every time she returned to the Yang clan manor, she could see Yang Xi. The two of them were gradually warming up. They were just waiting for the right opportunity to get married. All of this was thanks to Yang Chendong. When she saw Dong Shuai enter the immortal abode, Mu Lily hurried over to greet him. She said respectfully, "Sixth young master, why have you come? I need to receive an important guest. How about this? Immediately prepare the best private room and arrange for some quick-witted and nimble attendants to serve him." Yang Chendong nodded at Mu Lily with a smile. Then, he turned to Tiger's mane and gave him a light nod, indicating for him to check the surroundings. Regardless of whether or not the emperor would bring guards with him, if something really did happen, he would still be in a lot of trouble. Tiger's mane led Mu Lily up to the third floor with a group of people. They entered the private room and carefully inspected it. After confirming that there were no problems, they went downstairs. What they saw was a young man dressed like a noble young master, escorted by a group of people, arriving at the immortal abode's entrance. "Young master, you've come?" Yang Chendong smiled as he walked over to greet him. When he saw Zhu Qizhen, who was dressed like a noble young master, he didn't kneel. Zhu Qizhen was dressed casually. He obviously didn't want others to know his identity. He didn't feel the slightest bit of displeasure at Yang Chendong's refusal to kneel. On the contrary, he nodded happily. Wang Zhan, who was also dressed casually, asked in a low voice, "Sixth young master, has everything been arranged?" "It's been arranged. The best private room on the third floor. Please." Yang Chendong nodded lightly, indicating that everything was ready. He turned around and led the way up the stairs to the third floor. In order to protect the privacy of their guests, the immortal abode had even covered the two sides of the stairs with red cloth. This way, only the owner would know who the guests were, and no one else would know. This was exactly what Zhu Qizhen wanted, and he boldly made his way to the third floor. In the private room, Zhu Qizhen sat on the east side, while Wang Zhan carefully waited on him. Yang Chendong left after asking what the emperor wanted to eat and what songs and dances he wanted to perform on the first floor. With his current status, it wasn't appropriate for him to appear in this kind of setting. If he insisted on appearing, the difference in status would only make him feel awkward. Now that there was no one else in the private room, Wang Zhan took the opportunity to voice his opinion, urging Zhu Qizhen to personally lead the troops. "Your Majesty, you are young and promising, and your heroic bearing is flourishing. Today, the great Ming dynasty is prosperous, and the people live a prosperous life. All of this is inextricably linked to your wise leadership." Wang Zhan smiled as he praised Zhu Qizhen. Naturally, Everyone was willing to listen to flattery, and Zhu Qizhen was no exception. Even though he heard nothing but flattery every day, it didn't stop him from continuing to listen. Teacher, our country's stability is due to the efforts of my subjects, as well as your contributions. Zhu Qizhen drank the fine wine and ate the piping hot delicacies that had just been served. Through the transparent glass, he watched the lively singing and dancing on the first floor. He watched the singers wearing the miniskirts that Yang Chendong had suggested, singing and dancing. It was truly a joyous sight. Zhu Qizhen knew that the costumes of these dancers had received a lot of criticism when they first appeared. There were even some who sent him memorials about it, causing quite a stir. In the end, Wang Jin took the initiative to resolve this issue. He insisted that this was all a commercial activity and that it was to serve the public. It was a delicacy in the eyes of many. In fact, this kind of event had attracted countless so-called gentlemen to watch. Many of them cursed the spider lilies while enjoying the benefits. It really was the type of person who enjoyed pain and pleasure at the same time. Now that Zhu Qizhen was in such a good mood, Wang Jun felt that coming to the immortal abode to discuss this matter was the correct decision. At the same time, he said what he wanted to say. Your Majesty, your ability to rule the world has already reached the peak. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that no one will be able to do it in the future, but at the very least, no one has done it before. However, in the end, you are still lacking by a little bit. Everyone says that true experts conquer the world on horseback and rule the world from horseback. You still lack the ability to personally lead an imperial army and cut through all obstacles on the battlefield. If you can accomplish this, I can't imagine that the title of the #1 sage monarch in history would belong to none other than your Majesty. Personally lead an imperial army? Zhu Qizhen had never thought about this before, so Wang Zhan's words piqued his interest. Zhu Qizhen was only 22 years old. He was young, energetic, and full of vigor. At the same time, he had the same impulsiveness and desire for success as other young people. Originally, he hadn't thought about personally leading an imperial army, and had even been worried about who to send to lead the troops. However, when he heard that he could personally lead the troops, it was as if a door had been opened in his mind. It was like a bright light had suddenly appeared in the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. Yes, you will personally lead an imperial army. Wang Zhan, who had been paying attention to Zhu Qizhen, noticed that the emperor didn't have the slightest bit of reluctance. On the contrary, he had an expression of eagerness. He immediately knew that there was hope, so he continued to advocate. Think about Han Dynasty's Emperor Gaozu, Liu Bang, who was the first emperor to lead an imperial army and unite the world. Liu Yu personally led many expeditions to the north, establishing the Liu Song. Tang Taizong, Li Shimin, personally led an expedition to Goguryeo. There was also Emperor Cheng who led 3 expeditions to Mongolia, forcing them to surrender. However, when they heard the name of Emperor Cheng, they trembled in fear. Right now, your Majesty is still young, and we have millions of mighty soldiers. Facing a small walla, we can easily win in a single battle. Moreover, the fame of our army will spread far and wide. Wherever we go, I'm afraid that the enemy will collapse without fighting. In the future, when people mention your Majesty's name, I'm sure that they will also tremble in fear, not daring to offend the Ming dynasty in the slightest. In this way, your Majesty will definitely be recorded in the history books. It is also very possible for your Majesty to become an eternal emperor. Under Wang Zhan's description, Zhu Qizhen seemed to have already seen himself leading a mighty army into battle. Wherever he went, the enemy would tremble in fear and surrender at the sight of the wind. Weapons and armor would be thrown all over the ground, and there would be countless deserters and surrenders. Good, good. As if he was under the influence of self-hypnosis, Zhu Qizhen let out a series of cheers, followed by a hearty laugh. The emperor was so happy that Wang Zhan's face also revealed a somewhat abnormal luster. The military power that he had longed for a long time seemed to be within his reach. After this battle, he would return to the court victorious. At that time, even if the emperor wanted to touch him, he wouldn't be completely powerless to fight back. He could still live for a few more decades. At that time, what position would he be in? What kind of glory and achievements would he enjoy? Chapter 133. Two people, a man and a hermaphrodite, were laughing loudly in the private room, as if they had encountered something extremely happy. Their laughter seemed to shake the entire private room. Yang Chendong, who had been waiting outside, carefully paid attention to the movements in the room. When the laughter came out without restraint, he guessed a possibility. He felt that the matter had been settled, and it should be time for him to appear. He immediately waved his hand, and a waiter brought over a delicacy that had just been prepared. Taking this opportunity, he pushed the door open and entered. Yang Chendong's sudden entry did not affect the hearty laughter of the ruler and official. Wang Jin even had the intention to show off to him. "Chendong, quickly come and pay your respects to the wisest and greatest emperor in our history. The emperor is going to personally lead the troops to Walla." As he spoke, Wang Jun gave Yang Chendong a look. Personally lead the troops. Yang Chendong appeared to be very surprised on the surface, but in his heart, he thought that it was indeed so. If one did not seek death, one would not die. Zhu Qizhen was jumping into the fire pit himself. As a bystander, he was afraid that he would not be able to stop him. Yang Chendong's surprised look was seen by Zhu Qizhen. Does Minister Yang have a different opinion? Yang Chendong, what do you mean? Wang Zhan had given countless looks just now because he was afraid that Yang Chendong would get in the way. At this moment, in order to prevent the other party from speaking rudely, he even directly called out the official's name. From this, it could be seen that if Yang Chendong said something wrong, he would dare to let the Hu Bin soldiers outside rush in and throw him into the imperial prison. Feeling Wang Zhan's threat and the emperor's suspicion, how could Yang Chendong not know what to say? Personally lead the troops. This is really too good. Since ancient times, a famous emperor must be proficient in both the pin and the sword. Looking at our Ming dynasty now, the sea is peaceful and peaceful. Your Majesty has already seen results in governing the country through the use of the pin. If you personally go on an expedition, it can really be said that no one has ever done it before. Yang Chendong's praise was even similar to what Wang Zhan had said just now. Immediately, the two people in the room were overjoyed. When Wang Zhan saw that Yang Chendong was so tactful, he was very happy. He smiled and said, "As the saying goes, great minds think alike. In the past, I didn't believe it, but now, I have no choice but to believe it." That's right, Mr. and Minister Yang have the same opinion. It seems that this time, we must personally lead the troops to prove the might of our nation. Ha ha ha. Zhu Qizhen also laughed in agreement. Not only could he make a name for himself, but he could also go out and have fun. This was a good opportunity to gain both fame and fortune. No matter how he looked at it, it was a good opportunity. However, at this time, Zhu Qizhen didn't even think about the possibility of losing the war. Perhaps in his eyes, he had never regarded Walla as a great enemy. During the time of Emperor Cheng, the strength of the nation was not as strong as it was now. They were still defeated by the Mongol Empire. Now, after decades of development, they really didn't see the slightest possibility of losing the war. This attitude attracted the praise of the emperor and Wang Zhan. Yang Chendong also pretended to have a flushed face and laughed at the side. However, as he laughed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and said with a very determined attitude, "Your Majesty, this subject has a request. I hope that Your Majesty will agree." "Oh, what is it? Let's hear it." Zhu Qizhen was in a good mood at this time, so his attitude towards Yang Chendong was naturally very good. Even Wang Zhan, who was at the side, was prepared to help Yang Chendong. After all, the other party cooperated with him so much. Even if it was to return the favor, he still had to make a move when it was necessary. Under the attention of four people, Yang Chendong's heart was set. He knew that his request would definitely be approved. He immediately raised his head and cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, although this subject has a low position and is idle, I still consider myself a part of the great Ming Empire. Since Your Majesty is going to personally lead the army, this subject requests to accompany you. I also want to admire Your Majesty's heroic actions and the scene of your victory. When you return in triumph, this subject will definitely record everything and arrange it into a dance song to let the whole world know of Your Majesty's greatness and wisdom." There were also different levels of flattery. When Yang Chendong said this, it immediately scratched Zhu Qizhen's itch. He thought that victory indeed needed someone to record it. Although historians would record it, it was only words on paper. How could it be more intuitive and moving than a dance song? Immediately, he was overjoyed and agreed. Good, good. Yang Shi's loyalty is commendable. We will allow him to play. Wang Zhan, who was at the side, was also very happy. Yang Chendong took the initiative to ask to accompany the emperor. Didn't this mean that he was also optimistic about this battle? As such, no words were more effective than action. At this time, he looked at Yang Chendong with an increasingly happy gaze. Thank you, Your Majesty. Yang Chendong hurriedly expressed his gratitude and then stood up with a happy expression. He had decided to personally lead the army. Zhu Qizhen couldn't wait for even a moment. It was as if victory was right in front of him, and if he was a step late, the merit would belong to someone else. He didn't watch the song and dance he ordered, and didn't eat the delicious food he ordered. He hurriedly left the immortal residence with Wang Zhan. After the emperor left, Yang Chendong also called Mu Lily, who was on duty, to return to the Yang family manor. Everyone who had received the news was currently waiting in the main hall of the manor, waiting for the sixth young master to call for a meeting. Not everyone was present at the meeting. Yang Chendong first met with Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, Madame Xiang, Dong Hanxiang, as well as the two foremen of the immortal residence, Mu Lily and Cui Naer. In the main hall, Yang Chendong was extremely solemn and serious. The five women were also affected by the atmosphere, and their expressions became much more serious. Even Madame Shui, who used to throw flirtatious glances at Yang Chendong in the past, retracted her seductive gaze at this time. Madame Xiang was very beautiful. She had an elegant temperament, and her figure was also very voluptuous. According to the previous book, she was different from Madame Shui, who looked like Su Qing. She looked more like a young Guanzhilin. With her big eyes and towering breasts, there were very few men who could control themselves after seeing her. However, Yang Chendong was one of those rare men. It wasn't that he wasn't moved, but rather that he hadn't been able to find the right opportunity. Madame Xiang's dance was beautiful, and her talent in this field was outstanding. There were many performances in the immortal residence that required her to rehearse, so there wasn't enough time. With Qiao Yin and Madame Shui, Yang Chendong didn't insist on it. When it came to women, what he liked was the feeling of success when the conditions were right, and not the feeling of doing something in a hurry. In his opinion, that kind of combination would deprive him of a sense of beauty. It wasn't something he liked. This time, he called the five women over. Yang Chendong didn't waste any time on pleasantries. He went straight to the point and mentioned that he was about to follow the emperor to the border. Upon hearing that there was going to be a war, and that the sixth young master was going to personally take part, the five women couldn't help but show a hint of concern. In contrast, Mu Lily and Cui Naer were much more reserved, but Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang all had expressions of reluctance and concern. There were even tears in their eyes that seemed ready to pour down at any moment. Enough. Going to war with the emperor, the young master is a civil official, so he won't be in any danger. As for the rest of you, once I'm gone, I'm afraid that the capital will fall into chaos. You must not panic. If you encounter a situation where things can't be controlled, immediately retreat to the Yang clan manor. I will arrange for people to protect you here. Yang Chendong's face was brimming with confidence when it came to his own safety, but he truly couldn't be at ease when it came to these women. All of them were heavenly beauties. Once the capital fell into chaos, who knew if some of them would be tempted by lust and take risks? For the sake of their safety, Yang Chendong had intentionally left Dao Zhao's group of 10 and the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad in the Yang clan manor. Yang Si, Yang Lu, and Yang San of the Security Bureau had been left in the capital, so there shouldn't be any problems. But he was still worried that these women wouldn't be willing to abandon the immortal abode in the face of danger, which was why he had called them to this meeting. He had only one goal in mind. In times of danger, everyone in the immortal abode had to retreat to the manor. As for whether or not the immortal abode would be plundered by others, he couldn't care less. It was impossible to take care of everything in the first place. Since he had intentionally warned them about this, he believed that the girls would not panic too much if something were to happen. Young master, didn't you say that there wouldn't be any danger? Why did you make such an arrangement? Xiaoying had followed Yang Chendong for a long time, and she was the woman who understood him the best. She had been to Crimson City before, and she was well aware of just how powerful that place was. Even with such tyrannical strength, Yang Qindong had still made such an order. Xiaoying couldn't help but think about it. There's always a what-if in everything. Aren't I just preparing for the worst? Haha. Yang Qindong winked at Xiao Yin, his eyes gleaming. Xiao Yin's mental defenses crumbled, and she didn't say anything else. He quickly made appropriate arrangements for the women. After they left, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, 1st Battalion Commander Xiao Feng, 1st Squad Commander Qiu Vi, 2nd Squad Commander Dao Xiao, Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad Commander Bai Zhua, and the others stood in the main hall. None of them sat down. They all had solemn expressions as they waited for Yang Qindong to give them orders. Very good. You don't panic in the face of trouble. This is a necessary quality for a leader. This young master hopes that you can remain as calm as you are now. Yang Qindong's gaze swept over everyone. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. You've all been in hiding for so long. Now, it's time for you to show your prowess. Now, I order. Everyone had gone through strict military training and formation training. As soon as the command was given, everyone tensed up their bodies, put their feet together, and stood at attention. Satisfied with everyone's performance, Yang Qindong said, I order. Chapter 134. Within the palace, they were also nervously making preparations. Compared to the order in the Yang village, this place was much more chaotic. Zhu Qizhen was afraid that a long delay would lead to trouble, and that the ministers would oppose him when they heard the news. Zhu Qizhen privately ordered Wang Zhen to make full preparations before the war, striving to set out as early as possible. He was already eager to go out and show off. Naturally, this was also what Wang Zhen wanted. Whether or not he could seize military power would depend on his performance this time. He called all his disciples and grand-disciples over. More than half of the eunuchs began to move. They mobilized troops and issued orders. They were extremely busy. Wang Zhen, who did not know anything about military matters, did not have enough understanding of Walla's attacks. He thought that by letting Yingzong personally lead the troops, he would be able to scare the Walla troops away. Hence, to win by luck, he decided to make Yingzong personally lead the troops when the Ming dynasty was not fully prepared. He wanted Yingzong to follow Song Jinzong's example and leave a good name in history. Yingzong usually listened to Wang Zhen. This time, when he heard Wang Zhen's words, he felt that this was a good chance for him to show off his skills. Hence, he did not discuss with the officials and made the decision. He also announced that they would set out in 2 days. The moment Yingzong personally led the troops, all the officials were shocked. When the officials found out, they immediately used Minister of War Kuang Yi to say, "It is not good for the 6th Master to go out." Minister of Personnel Wang Zhen led the officials to advise against it. Reports of the defeat at the Datong front lines continued to spread to the imperial capital. These military uniforms that annoyed people in the past were like soul-reaping messengers in Zhu Qizhen's eyes. Since he had already made his decision and was attracted by the results of the victory, Yingzong totally trusted Wang Zhen and insisted on personally leading the troops. As for the advice of the officials, he did not care at all. Now that the emperor had given his imperial decree, after a series of useless remonstrations, the only thing that the officials could do was to be appointed by him. Since the emperor was personally leading the troops, the number of officials following him naturally could not be small. If not, wouldn't they become a joke? Regarding this point, Wang Zhen quickly made preparations. A total of 100 officials and civil servants were present. Similar to history, even the people following the emperor were the same. The only change was that Yu Qian, the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, was absent from the capital. Without this pillar of support at this crucial moment, there was a hint of uncertainty as to whether or not the defense of the capital would begin, how it would begin, and how it would end. In just a few days, all the soldiers in the capital had mobilized. 500,000 soldiers from the northern provinces had gathered in the capital, and under Zhu Qizhen's personal command, they were ready to leave the capital to reinforce Datong on the 2nd day. There was going to be a big battle, and the emperor was going to personally lead the troops. Regarding this, the common people naturally raised both hands in agreement. Since the establishment of the Ming dynasty, The people of the Ming dynasty had never experienced defeat in a foreign war. As such, they were very confident in their own army. Compared to the common people who did not know what was going on, some important officials had a different view. For example, in the home of the Minister of Rites, Hu Shao, he did not have a good opinion of the emperor going on an expedition. In the study of the Hu residence, Hu Shao and his eldest son, Hu Zhongning, were analyzing the situation of the battle. On the table was the battle report from the front lines. On it was written as follows. East, Tuachuo Buhua and Wulianya attacked Liaodong. West, other generals attacked Ganzhou, Zhangya of Gansu. The center was the focus of the attack and was split into two. One was led by Alashiyuan and attacked Red City of the Xuanfu. The other was led by Yeshin and attacked Dadong. Yeshin's attack on Dadong was led by, his troops were very sharp. The Dadong army lost, and the castle outside the Great Wall was destroyed. Datong's general Wu Hao died in Mao'er village. The Ming dynasty's constable commandant Jing Yuan and the other three generals each led 10,000 men to defend against the enemy. Father, Walla's army came prepared, but our army was in a hurry to fight. In this situation, we should fight slowly. With the strength of the Ming dynasty, we can slowly win. I really don't understand why the emperor wants to personally lead the troops. Isn't this too risky? Although Hu Zhongning was part of the embroidered uniform guard, he had good talent in military affairs. When he analyzed the situation, he hit the nail on the head. That's right. Very satisfied with his son's insight, Hu Chang nodded approvingly. However, his expression quickly became very helpless as he said, Minister Kuang of the Ministry of War, Minister Wang of the Ministry of Appointments, and other important officials all tried to persuade him, but the emperor did not listen. What can we do? Just as Hu Chang showed a helpless expression, Hu Yen rushed in from outside the study. Once she entered the study, before she could catch her breath, she said anxiously, Grandfather, Father, did he go as well? Can we not let him go? Needless to say, everyone knew who she was referring to. Faced with this question, Hu Chang first nodded and then shook his head. Yang Shima is indeed on the list of people accompanying the emperor. However, I heard that he asked for it. Furthermore, the army is leaving tomorrow. Unless he asks for it himself and needs a good reason, no one can stop it. I'll go find him now. After Hu Yen heard this, her lips pressed together tightly and she turned to leave. Wait. Hu Zhongning suddenly called out to his daughter. Yen'er, you are still a girl after all. Not to mention that the Yang family has not given you a betrothal gift. Even if they did, it doesn't count until you are married. Why are you going now? Be good and stay at home. Father. Hearing that Hu Zhongning was stopping her from going, Hu Yan's face immediately became anxious. Although she was not married, her heart had long been tied to Yang Chendong. As if he knew what kind of personality his daughter had, after Hu Zhongning stopped her, he directly shouted outside the study, Is Lieutenant Sun Chuang here? Here. Sun Chuang, who was responsible for security outside the door, immediately responded, Watch the young Mississippi. Without my order, she is not allowed to leave the house. Hu Zhongning ordered loudly. When a man went to the battlefield, his head was tied to his belt. No one could guarantee that he would return safely. If there was a problem, his daughter would still have to marry. At this moment, he naturally had to keep his reputation intact. Hu Yan's matter was ultimately just a small episode. The next morning, on the 16th of July, 1449 AD, Ingzong ordered his brother, Zhu Qiyu, to guard the capital. Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen gathered an army of 500,000 in a few days, randomly allocated some food and weapons, and hurriedly set off. Along with Ingzong and Wang Zhen were Duke Ing Zhangfu, Minister of War Kuang Yi, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua, Cabinet Scholars Chao Nai, Zhang Yi, Crown Prince Yang Chendong, and more than 100 other civil and military officials. However, Ingzong did not allow them to participate in military and political affairs, leaving all military and political power to Wang Zhen alone. Due to the improper organization, all military and political affairs were arbitrarily decided by Wang Zhen. Duke Changhua Zhu Yong was a general, but in front of Wang Zhen, he had to kneel. Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua asked the emperor to return to the army, and Wang Zhen ordered him to kneel in the grass until the sky turned dark. The civil and military officials accompanying the expedition were not allowed to participate in military and political affairs, and the army was in chaos. Yang Chendong was also among the officials, and not only that, he even asked Wang Zhan for a position in the army. This was also a reward for Wang Zhan to thank Yang Chendong for taking the initiative to speak up for him in the immortal abode. It was precisely because of this that the sixth young master was able to arrange for his own people to serve by his side. The so-called own people naturally referred to Tiger Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, and Qiu Vi's first guard, as well as Xiao Feng's first company of cold-edge soldiers. As long as Yang Chendong didn't interfere, the outcome of this battle was obvious. Once they were surrounded by Walla's army, it would be very dangerous without sufficient strength to protect them. Yang Chendong had only just transferred the first company of cold-edge soldiers over, and it was also at this time that he began to bare his fangs. This was one of the benefits of joining the army. Although he didn't have any real authority, especially under Wang Zhan's leadership, he could still arrange for a few people to serve by his side. The chaos of the army also brought benefits to his arrangements. At the very least, no one cared or questioned him. Similarly, because the preparations for this expedition had been rushed and poorly organized, the army was in chaos not long after they set out. Before they even reached Dadong, the army was already running low on food. People were dying one after another, and corpses covered half the road. It had to be said that because the army had been assembled too hastily, the gathering of 500,000 soldiers had been extremely chaotic from the start. Just how chaotic was it? The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had fallen off his horse due to the crowd. The Minister of War was the equivalent of the current Minister of Defense. Even he had fallen into chaos, so one could only imagine how poorly organized and disciplined the army was. How could such an army possibly win a battle? They didn't care about the situation of the enemy, nor did they discuss battle plans. They didn't even arrange for logistical support, treating this expedition like a child's game. Wang Zhan was in charge of all military affairs, and the accompanying civil and military officials didn't participate. This was simply an amateur commanding an expert. Yang Chendong didn't say anything about Wang Zhan's random orders. He knew that even if he wanted to say something, the other party probably wouldn't listen. Since that was the case, all they could do was wait and see what would happen, as well as do what they could. For example, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, wasn't young anymore. Seeing him kneel in the grass, Wang Zhuo had personally delivered a thick, praying mat to him. The commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Ji Guang, had seen everything clearly and reported this matter to Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan was very busy and wanted to get involved in everything, big or small, so that everyone could do as he wished. When he heard the report that it was Yang Chendong's doing, he only frowned and waved his hand. Let him go. Record everything about him, and we'll talk about it later. Of course, he wasn't letting him go out of the kindness of his heart. Wang Zhan wanted to record everything and interrogate Yang Chendong to see if he could extort more silver. Chapter 135. Yang Chendong walked up to Wang Zhuo and placed the thick prayer mat under the legs of the Minister of Revenue. This small action caused tears to well up in the eyes of this 65-year-old man. This small action was not to be underestimated, but none of the other officials would dare to do it. They didn't even have the ability to protect themselves, much less help others. Yang Chendong, it's not worth it for you to do this. Wang Zhan will definitely hold a grudge against you. Once he returns to the court, he'll probably settle everything. Wang Zhuo kindly reminded Yang Chendong. It's fine. Respecting the old and loving the young is one of the virtues. Even if someone tries to blame me, I'll just explain myself to him. Yang Chendong nonchalantly smiled, but in his heart, he was thinking, will Wang Zhan return to the court? Hearing Yang Chendong talk about virtues, Wang Zhuo's tears flowed down his face. He was so moved that he didn't know what to say. Seeing that the old man was crying like a child, Yang Chendong squatted down, took out a handkerchief, and handed it over. Lord Wang, you still have to take care of your body. It's very windy outside. Quickly dry your tears. It won't be good if you get an eye disease again. Okay. Thank you, Yang Chendong. Wang Zhuo took the handkerchief and wiped his eyes, his heart filled with gratitude. It was said that a friend in need was a friend indeed. Yang Chendong had barely left the capital, but he had already begun to win over the hearts of his people. And this was only the beginning. It could only be described as the first meeting of a towering figure. The army left Juyong Pass on the 19th and arrived at the Xin Manor. On the 28th, they arrived at the southern part of Yanghe City. It could be said that the army moved very quickly. Yanghe City was one of the 72 castles of Datong in the Ming dynasty. It was 4,600 meters long, and the city walls were 11.6 meters high. There was also a trench that was 10 meters deep. There was a barbican built inside and outside the city gate, which was the ancient battlefield where Liu Bang was besieged by Bai Deng. During the Yuan dynasty, it was called Bai Deng County. 10 days before Ing Zong's army arrived, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Ming army engaged in an intense battle with Yeshen. A total of 40,000 Ming soldiers were defeated by the Walla army. Even Dadong provincial governor Song Ying, Prince Consort Jing Yuan, and Zhu Mian all died in battle. From this, one could see the heavy casualties. When the Ying sect's army arrived, the battlefield had not been cleaned up yet. Corpses of the Ming dynasty's army were strewn all over, and there was an unpleasant smell and a fearful atmosphere. This dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's army, and some of the more cowardly ones started to desert. Ing Zong continued to advance. He wanted to find Walla's main force for a decisive battle, but at this time, Yeshen withdrew his forces and retreated beyond the Great Wall. 8th month, first day, the Ming army entered the strategic city of Dadong, wanting to reach a standstill with the Walla army, who knew that Yeshen did not choose to fight head-on. Instead, he retreated north to lure the Ming army in. Although Dadong was a strategic city, it was unable to support such a huge logistical supply. Seeing that the chances of a decisive battle were slim, and the army continued to stay here, not only would it not be of any use, but they would also suffer heavy losses every day. Thus, the officials all suggested to move back to the court. Yang Chendong did not follow the officials to ask the emperor. Instead, he looked on coldly from the side. Just from the situation at that time, the decision to move back to the court was the right one. Although they had mobilized so many people and did not achieve anything, at least the army did not suffer any heavy losses. At this moment, not only did Yang Chendong see this point, but even Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhan, the actual commander of the army, also saw this point. The Battle of Datong had started under Wang Zhan's instructions. He had sent Datong's General Song Ying and military governor Shi Hong to fight with Walla. In his mind, the two of them were more than enough to take care of them first. This way, when he arrived, he could put on a show and show off. There was no need to really fight. Speaking of which, if they really fought, Wang Zhan might not have the guts to do so. Wang Zhan was worried that Song Ying and Shi Hong would not go all out, so he arranged for his trusted eunuch Guo Jing to be the army supervisor. Under the urging of this eunuch, the two sides fought. Due to their eagerness to fight, they fell into Yeshen's ambush. Furthermore, because of Guo Jing, a portion of Song Ying's army was wiped out. Shi Hong and Guo Jing escaped and talked about how strong Walla was, which scared Wang Zhan. Since the civil and military officials were all trying to persuade him to retreat, he chose to follow the wishes of everyone and agreed. Since they decided to retreat, they were not far from Dadong, so there would not be any danger. They could just treat it as a vacation for 500,000 people. On the 3rd day of the 8th month, the Ming army decided to retreat. Dadong Deputy General Guo Deng suggested that they retreat from Zijing Pass to Beijing. This would be far away from Walla's possible attack route and would be relatively safe. However, Wang Zhan once again stood out and gave a different suggestion. For Wang Zhan to have his current position, it was because of his opportunistic nature. However, it was because of this that he acted like a small person and was used to showing off wherever he went. Now that he knew how strong the Walla cavalry was, he knew that he could not fight. However, if he went back just like that, he would feel some regret. As such, he decided to satisfy his desire to show off. He suggested not returning to Dadong but to Shangshi Yuzhou, Wang Zhan's hometown. He wanted to use this chance to show off. When he left Shangshi Yuzhou, Wang Zhan was still a poor man. Now that he had unlimited power, he wanted to return to his hometown and show off. Due to Wang Zhan's insistence and the fact that Zhu Qizhen agreed, the army could only head toward Shangshi Yuzhou. However, Just as they were about to reach Yuzhou and were 40 miles away from Zijing Pass, Wang Zhen suddenly changed his mind and asked everyone to stop. The reason was that he was afraid that the army would trample on the crops in Yuzhou. Before the new year, he had obtained large amounts of potato seeds from the Yangjia village and Ministry of Revenue and planted them here. To protect these high-yielding crops, the army could not advance. This reason once again convinced Zhu Qizhen, and the army headed toward the Xin Manor. Regarding this, Yang Chendong still maintained his silence. At this moment, even if he tried to persuade them, what could he do? With his current identity and position, his words would not be accepted by Wang Zhen and Ying Zong. If he rashly suggested it, it would only draw their disgust. As the Ming dynasty army headed toward the Xin Manor, Yeshin, who had been following behind, also started to have thoughts. Yeshin's main force of cavalry was only around 30,000 people. Facing the Ming dynasty's main force of 500,000, he did not have confidence in winning in one battle. After following the Ming dynasty army for over 10 days and seeing the Ming dynasty army twist and turn around like a dumb bug, his heart slowly filled with confidence. It seemed like these 500,000 people were not strong and would not be able to take a single blow. As such, he gave the order to attack. Walla's elite cavalry split into two groups and attacked the Ming dynasty army. When Wang Zhen heard the news, he was very nervous and quickly retracted his army. He also sent Marquis Gongshun Wu Kazhong and Governor Wu Kaqin to lead troops to resist the battle. In the end, they were defeated. Wu Kazhong's troops acted as the Ming dynasty's rearguard and had more than 10,000 people, but they were still unable to take a single blow. After the defeat, he sent Duke Sheng Zhuyong and Duke Yongshun Shueshi to lead 40,000 troops to Yaowa Ridge to fight with Yeshin. In the end, they were ambushed and completely wiped out. The troops that Zhu Yong led were the elites of the Ming dynasty, and they were mainly cavalry. After this force was wiped out, the Ming dynasty army had already lost the ability to fight with Yeshin. At the same time, their morale had also started to fall. Just like that, the day before the Ming dynasty army arrived at the Tumu Castle, they had already suffered heavy losses. They lost around 50,000 men, and their actual military strength, not including the transport troops and civilian workers, was less than 200,000. Furthermore, they had lost their elite cavalry. When Zhu Yong led 30,000 men into Yeshin's ambush and did not return, Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen were so scared that they peed their pants and ran back. On the 13th day of the 8th month, the army entered the Tumu Castle. When the army arrived at the Tumu Castle, the sky was not dark and the sun had not set. At this moment, they were only 20 miles away from Huailai County, and they could rush there in a short time. The moment the army entered the county, the Walla cavalry would not be able to do anything. At this moment, it could be said that it was a matter of life and death. Wang Zhen was up to no good, and he ordered the army to stop advancing. It turned out that the 1,000-odd carriages that belonged to Wang Zhen had not arrived. These were the things that the border troops had given him along the way, and they were worth millions of silver. As the person in charge of this north expedition, the gifts from the local official Zhuangxing were naturally accepted by Wang Zhen. The gifts from the officials along the way were too generous, which was why Wang Zhen gave up on the chance to enter Huailai City. Wang Zhen requested for everyone to wait for the carriages to arrive before they left. Hence, at the Tumu Castle, Zhu Qizhen, hundreds of officials, and hundreds of thousands of troops waited foolishly for an entire night. When the sun rose, the 1,000-odd carriages still had not arrived. Wang Zhen could not wait any longer. In his heart, he knew that the carriages would not arrive, and at this moment, he wanted to leave. Unfortunately, even if he wanted to leave, it was already too late. With a night's time, the 30,000 Walla elite cavalry had split up and surrounded the Ming army. In the end, the hundreds of thousands of troops were surrounded by the 20,000 Walla cavalry in the Tumu Castle, which had no water source. To say that 30,000 troops surrounded hundreds of thousands of troops was impossible under normal circumstances. However, after these few days, the army was like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Their morale was all gone, and they had lost half of their original combat strength. Wang Zhen was also frightened by the charging Walla cavalry. In his panic, he used the Tumu Castle as the center to dig trenches and set up barriers to protect himself. Unfortunately, Wang Zhan did not know how to fight, and he did not even understand the geography of the place. The Tumu castle was located on high ground, and there was no water source, so it was not a place that could be defended. Hence, in the following days, the hundreds of thousands of Ming troops were surrounded by Yeshin for a full 2 days and 3 nights, and the lack of water became more and more serious. The Ming army dug 3 feet into the ground, but they could not find a single drop of water. Their morale was all gone, and their thoughts changed. 8th month, 15th day, Yeshen suddenly withdrew his troops. He said that he was not going to fight, and he even sent a messenger over to say that he wanted to negotiate. This was just him playing hard to get. Chapter 136. However, Wang Zhan believed it. Perhaps he was lying to himself. When he saw that Yeshen had retreated first, he immediately gave the order to go out and find a water source. With this order, the soldiers removed the encirclement, jumped out of the trench, and ran with all their might towards a small river 15 li away. The troops were instantly thrown into chaos. Looking from afar, one could only see a dense mass of black. However, after running for 3 to 4 li, tens of thousands of Walla elite cavalry suddenly appeared and charged into the chaos of the Ming dynasty army. When the soldiers reached 10,000, there was no end. When the soldiers reached 100,000, there was no end. The Walla army besieged the Ming dynasty army from all sides. The cavalry rushed in and waved their swords to kill the Ming dynasty army. The Ming dynasty army suffered heavy casualties. Wherever the cavalry swords passed, heads flew high into the air. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere. At the same time, they shouted, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." In times of crisis, we could see the shamelessness of the Ming dynasty officials. The Walla army's slogan was, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." As long as they threw away their armor and weapons, it was fine. However, in order to save their lives, these officials actually took off everything and trampled on each other naked. The number of people trampled to death by their own people was more than the number of people killed by the Walla army. At that time, the Walla army was already not in formation and did not have the heart to kill the enemy. This was because they were busy getting rich, specifically picking up gold, silver, jewels, and valuables to rob. At that time, if there were 1 or 2 strong generals who stood up and shouted, they might have been able to reverse the situation. During the 3 Kingdoms period, Cao Cao did this. Qin Xiong also did this under Zhang Shutuo and Li Mi. Unfortunately, Wang Zhan was not Cao Cao. The Ming dynasty generals did not have Qin Xiong or Qin Shubao. Everyone was busy taking off their clothes to save their lives. After taking off their clothes, the miserable state they were in became the laughingstock of history. Looking at Ing Zong, this fellow, he did not even dismount from his horse. Instead, under the tight protection of the embroidered uniform guards, he broke out of the encirclement and escaped. It was a pity that everyone was busy taking off their clothes at that time, so there was no one to support him. The embroidered uniform guard failed to break through the encirclement, and in the end, Zhu Qizhen became a lone boat on the sea, drifting under the protection of General Fanzhong. If not for Yang Qindong's appearance, he would have been like a little chick, dragged to the north by the Walla army. Ever since he had left the capital, Yang Qindong had acted like a spectator, observing everything that was happening around him. The Ming dynasty army suffered defeat after defeat, and wrong orders were given out by Wang Zhan. Zhu Qizhen was like a puppet, only knowing how to nod his head in agreement and unable to debate. Yang Qindong looked on coldly from the side. This was a close understanding of ancient warfare, as well as a close observation of the Ming dynasty's military power. Even if some of the orders were wrong and were opposed by the officials, Zhu Qizhen agreed and Wang Zhan carried them out. Even if Yang Qindong wanted to change anything, he could not do it. He could only watch as the army was surrounded and broken down, and in the end, the entire battle was a complete failure. In this, Yang Qindong was limited in what he could do. In the face of Wang Zhan, who had actual military power over hundreds of thousands of soldiers, unless he could hold Wang Zhan hostage, it was impossible for him to have any control over the war. Everything continued until the balance of the war was completely one-sided. The final moment had finally arrived. The Battle of Tumu could be considered a farce. There was no cavalry charging, no generals bravely killing the enemy, no decisive battle between large armies, and no spectacular sight of the firearms of the three major battalions opening fire on all fronts. The timing of Walla's attack was when the Ming dynasty's camp loosened up and moved to fetch water. Whether they fell for Yeshin's trick or the Ming dynasty took the initiative to fetch water, it was no longer important. Young master, it's a mess, it's all a mess. Hu Meng's eyes were filled with vigilance as he scanned his surroundings. The Type 54 gun hidden under his sleeves was already loaded, and the safety was off. Whenever he discovered anyone trying to approach or threaten the young master, he would not hesitate to open fire and kill the enemy. Sigh. A sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. This sigh was for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was for the decline of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was also for the sake of ending the chaos in front of him. Pass down the order. Follow the first set of plans. Yang Qindong's eyes were still cold, but if one looked carefully, there was a trace of liveliness and hope. After the order was given, the hundreds of people who had been wandering around began to move. Compared to the people around them who were in a complete mess and were even undressing, they were dressed in good clothes and moved quickly, each according to the previous plan. Wang Zhen, this eunuch, who only knew how to seize power and money, was like a headless fly at this moment. His eyes were constantly looking up and down, looking for a way to survive. For him, the defeat of the army was not terrible. As long as he could survive, everything would be fine. It would not be long before he could reorganize a new army and go to the battlefield. Of course, he might have the ability to do so, but whether or not he had the courage was another matter. His four eyes were still blinking rapidly when suddenly, someone flashed past his side. In a chaotic army, this kind of scene was too common. The soldiers did not know their generals, and the generals did not know their soldiers. They were completely like headless flies running around. However, just as a figure flashed past him, Wang Zhen felt a sharp pain in his neck. Instinctively, he stretched out his hand to touch it. Blood spurted out uncontrollably into his hand, and the hot sensation caused his eyes to widen rapidly. Soon after, he started to scream, "Save me, someone killed me." Wang Zhen was still conscious at this moment. He knew that at this moment, someone had done something to him. But in a chaotic battlefield, death was a very common thing. Even if he was the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, even if he was the most favored by Emperor Ming, no one was paying attention to him at this moment. One of his hands covered his neck that had been cut, as if he wanted to block the bleeding wound. The other hand was raised high and constantly waved, as if he wanted to use this to attract people's attention. He maintained this posture for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. After about 7 to 8 breaths of time, he fell to his knees with a plop. Then, his eyes turned gray, and his face showed an extremely strong expression of unwillingness. He was unwilling. He clearly had great power, so why did he fall to the ground? He was unwilling. The emperor had trusted him so much, and there was still a great future waiting for him. He was unwilling to accept the fact that he had died in such a dubious manner. Even when he died, he did not even know who had killed him. He was unwilling, but he was indeed dead. Wang Zhen was dead, dying in a chaotic battlefield. No one would pay attention to him. Even if someone saw him, they would probably want to step on him to vent their anger. Compared to Wang Zhen, who died at the hands of Lung Feng, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua and Minister of War Kuang Yu were saved by Lung Feng. Tiger's Man and Xiao Feng respectively saved the two ministers and rushed to Yang Qindong's side. In comparison, Kuang Ye's clothes were not bad, and his appearance was not bad. No matter what, he was still the Minister of War, so he should have some integrity. However, the buttons on his shirt that he remembered wrongly showed that when Walla's army said, "Remove your armor and don't kill those who throw blades," he was also flustered. Speaking of which, who was not afraid of death? When faced with death, it was not wrong for a person to react in any way. At least, it could not be said to be wrong, because it often replaced a person's instinct and nature. Kuang Yi only remembered a few buttons wrongly. Compared to Wang Zhua, he was indeed much better. This was because our Minister of Revenue had already taken off his robes and was only wearing underwear. Moreover, it was wrinkled and didn't fit him at all. At a glance, one could tell that it was the kind of clothes that he had snatched from somewhere and put on temporarily. Yang Chendong was not surprised at all by Wang's reaction. As a scholar, he should have integrity. However, in a chaotic battlefield, he would be affected by others and completely lose his mind. It was reasonable for him to do things that he would not have dared to do before. When the two ministers were brought in front of Yang Chendong, their faces naturally turned red. They felt ashamed of their current behavior, but this feeling quickly disappeared and was replaced by curiosity. They were curious as to why in such a chaotic situation, this crown prince who was only a fifth-rank official did not panic. Not only that, there were 10 to 20 strong men standing beside him. Compared to the panic of the other soldiers, these people stood up straight and their expressions were extremely serious. Their eyes were like poles as they scanned the surroundings. Their vigilance was clearly telling others not to casually walk into this place. Otherwise, the consequences would be very serious. The two ministers were surprised and many questions popped up in their minds. Then, another group of people came from afar. Their approach made the two of them nervous again. Don't worry, they are on the same side. Noticing the two ministers' reaction, Yang Chendong said softly. This was like the warm sunlight in the winter, instantly relaxing their minds. The people who came from afar were the Longfeng of the Yang clan's new army. Under their protection, the Right Assistant Minister Ding Xian of the Ministry of Justice, the Right Assistant Minister Wang Yonghe of the Ministry of Works, the Left Assistant Minister Yang Shan of the Ministry of Rights, the Right Assistant Minister Deng Li of the Imperial Censorate, the Assistant Minister Huang Yangjing of the Taichung Temple, the Assistant Minister Lu Rong of the Taichung Temple, and the Assistant Minister Ling Zhu of the Shangbao Temple were brought in front of Yang Chendong. Seeing the 7 people walking over, Yang Chendong's gaze carried a trace of doubt as he asked the Longfeng, just these? It's just that some of them are still in good condition. The others have trampled on each other to death. Some of them have already been stripped clean, and it's hard to tell who is who. The platoon leader of the Longfeng platoon stood at attention and said, Chapter 137. Well, my ability is limited. Being able to save these people is already very good. Let's go. Everyone, pack up and let's go find the emperor. Yang Chendong's chin gently moved. Although the first plan was to save 30 officials or marquis, the battlefield was originally ever-changing. No one could take care of everything. It was not easy to save a total of 9 people. At this time, the 9 Darren all noticed that something was wrong with Yang Chendong. This horse washer seemed to be calmer than anyone else. He even seemed to have a small number of elite armed forces with good fighting strength. But to be able to reach this position, which one of them was not a shrewd person? At this time, no one would open their mouth to ask why. If they were unhappy, the other party would just casually abandon them. Other than waiting for death, they did not know what to do. No one raised an objection. Yang Chendong led everyone to the place where the emperor was. Originally, everyone was with the emperor, but when the war started, the whole situation became chaotic. Fortunately, Yang Chendong had already arranged for people to keep an eye on the emperor's every move. As someone who had foreseen all of this would happen, how could he abandon Zhu Qizhen, this important big shot, at such a critical time? Compared to the chaos on the battlefield, where people were stripping off their armor and running away without resisting, the place where Zhu Qizhen was standing was very tragic. The performance of Hubin and the accompanying little eunuchs was probably the only bright spot in the whole change of the Tumu castle. They were shot into hedgehogs by the tiles, but they still fought to the death without retreating. Their purpose was to protect Emperor Zhu Qizhen, who was trembling in fear and had yellow water dripping from his trousers. Yes, at this time, Zhu Qizhen had completely lost the majesty of the emperor. His golden armor had long been thrown away. At this time, he was wearing an inner robe and was curled up in a corner, trembling. Later history books had recorded that even when Zhu Qizhen was captured by Walla's army, he was so calm, so brave, and even had a face of justice. He even dared to scold the enemy. But in fact, that was not the case. This was just a trick that Emperor Yingzong used to beautify himself after he became the emperor again. Only Yang Ming's, the orthodox northern hunting story, praised Zhu Qizhen as a flower. In fact, the records in Linrong records and Butai records were completely different. Just like Lu Dingji's record of negation of Taishang, we can see three things from the Tumf Castle incident. First, Wang Zhan was indeed the culprit behind the Tumu Castle incident. Second, Zhu Qijin was not calm at all. Third, the officials were very shameless, and the imperial guards, Hubin, were very loyal. When Yang Qindong and the 9 ministers arrived, they saw a group of Walla cavalry fighting against Hu Bin and the eunuchs. However, relatively speaking, the ones who were killed were the little eunuchs. By the time he arrived with everyone, all the eunuchs were dead, and not a single one was left. Only the general of the guards, Fan Zhong, and a dozen or so Hu Bin, who were seriously injured, were still resisting with all their might. Even though they were still far away, everyone could see that even their emperor would be captured by the Walla cavalry if they stayed any longer. The 9 ministers and all the new soldiers of the Yang family all looked at Yang Qindong. At this moment, he had undoubtedly become the backbone of everyone. Everyone's hopes were placed on him. Charge over, open a bloody path. Anyone who resists, kill. His face was indifferent, and his words fell from his mouth. If someone did not know, they would think that he was a general who had the overall situation under control. In fact, they only had 100 people, but the Walla cavalry had at least 300 people. The 9 ministers looked at Yang Qindong with suspicious eyes. They really could not understand what this horse-washing master was relying on at this moment. In contrast, the 100 soldiers were eager to give it a try. Speaking of which, these people had all been baptized by war. Some had participated in the war of Deng Maoqi's uprising and also participated in the Battle of Ryukyu Island. Speaking of which, if these people did not have outstanding strength and outstanding performance, they would not have become soldiers of the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion. Most of the time, the 1st Battalion represented the strongest. But no matter how many battles they had participated in, how many victories they had won, it could not compare to this time. This was in front of the 6th young master. Perhaps many of the soldiers would not have such an opportunity in their lives. But now, the opportunity was in front of them. Who would not want to perform well? At this time, the role of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Xiao Feng, suddenly appeared. As an officer and the current leader of the army, after hearing Yang Qindong's order, he said without the slightest hesitation, the 1st platoon is responsible for the left wing, the 2nd platoon is responsible for the right wing, the 3rd platoon is responsible for the 8th platoon, the 9th platoon is responsible for the safety of everyone, and the 10th platoon is responsible for the rear. After the order was given, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion quickly moved. Some went to the left, some went to the right, and some rushed to the front of Yang Qindong and the others. In less than 10 breaths, everyone was in position. Their speed and agility opened the eyes of the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was in the crowd. He had lived for decades, and most of the time, he was in communication with the branch. He could not be more clear about the execution and mobility of the great Ming dynasty's army. It was precisely because of this that he could see the horror of this army that jumped out of nowhere. Not to mention other things, just their mobility alone was inferior to the great Ming dynasty's army that he had seen. Even the elite army when Emperor Cheng was still alive would not have such a performance. They were able to be orderly in times of danger without the slightest trace of disorder. While the ministers were dazzled, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion completed the distribution of the battle formation. Then, after Xiao Feng said the word advance, the army began to attack forward. Step by step, they were very steady. The eyes of the 100 soldiers also lit up, and they were full of courage. Before everyone could see what was going on, a black firearm that no one had seen before appeared in the hands of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion. As soon as the firearm was taken out, these people seemed to have become one with it, giving people the feeling that this thing originally existed. The 100 soldiers moved forward in an orderly pace, narrowing the distance between them and the emperor step by step. The sudden appearance of this army naturally attracted the attention of the Walla cavalry not far away. The general who was in charge of commanding the battle saw that the great Ming dynasty's army was in chaos. Many of them were trampling on each other, many of them were running away, and some of them were surrendering. However, there was still an army that took the initiative to approach them. He was instantly infuriated. Still riding on the strong horse, The general did not put the 100 or so soldiers in front of him in his eyes. It was just a charge that could completely defeat them, so it did not arouse his interest. You, and you, go and kill those reckless people for me. Don't let them live. Kill them all. General Walla felt that his dignity had been provoked. He must give these people a heavy blow and let others who still dared to resist see the consequences of disobeying them. Kill. 50 to 60 Vala cavalrymen, dressed in the clothes of the Vala clan, were yelling and shouting as they charged towards Yang Chendong. In the eyes of the cavalry, as they charged, they would soon wipe out all the enemies like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Although the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty held a black firearm in their hands, they had seen such a battle formation before. The 3 firearm battalions of the Great Ming Dynasty's army, which had a total of 15,000 people, did not pose a threat to them. Didn't they all throw away their weapons and armor when the army charged? Be careful, the Walla cavalry is very brave and fierce. When the ministers saw the cavalry charging toward them, their bodies trembled and their voices trembled slightly. Compared to the ministers' fearful expressions, the 100 or so soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty did not take their eyes off the enemy. They all raised the firearms in their hands, and according to their usual training, they stood in formation and aimed at the corresponding cavalry. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion adjusted the rhythm of their breathing and waited for Xiao Feng's order to shoot. 200 steps, 150 steps, 100 steps. As the commander, Xiao Feng calmly looked at everything in front of him. He did not show any abnormal reaction because of the charge of the enemy cavalry. When he estimated that the enemy was 100 steps away, he immediately opened his mouth and spat out 2 words, shoot. His voice was an order. Immediately, dozens of crisp gunshots rang out. The bullets whizzed out of the barrels, as if they were carrying a trace of fire as they rushed forward. Even the moment the gunshots rang out, they sounded so orderly as if there was only one person firing from the beginning to the end. These were the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion, the strongest elites that Yang Chendong had spent a lot of effort to train. Under the high-intensity training and layers of tests, each and every one of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty. When the gunshots rang out, the Walla cavalry charging toward them were like small trees that were swept up by a strong wind and fell to the ground one by one. At this moment, all of the 50 to 60 men fell off their horses. Only 56 horses that had lost their owners ran toward them. Try to capture as many war horses as possible for the lords to use. Yang Chendong looked at the results of the first round of shooting and nodded with satisfaction. His expression also relaxed a lot. Before seeing a real battle, even though Yang Chendong was extremely confident in his training, he still lacked confidence. Most of the time, training included drills and real battle were 2 different things. Now, after a wave of bullets, it was effective. All the enemies were hit and killed, and no one was caught. This result was very satisfying and very gratifying. Chapter 138. After the order was given, Lung Feng grabbed the Vala horses one by one and brought them before the 9 ministers. What they received in return was a look of disbelief. Among the ministers, Kuang Ye's eyes were as wide as bells. What kind of firearm is this? How can it shoot so far and so accurately? Can you show it to me? Sorry, I can't. He watched as Kuang Ye's hand unconsciously reached for the gun in the hand of Long Feng, who had delivered the horse to him. Kuang Yi moved his body slightly and dodged the gun. Then, he looked at Long Feng with a cold and murderous gaze. It was this look that made Kuang Ye's body tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, he felt that he was so close to the god of death. Sorry, Minister Feng, they are mercenaries. They only took my money to do something. They won't listen to anyone and won't allow anyone to touch the weapons in their hands. If you insist on doing so, there's only one outcome, and that's becoming a dead man. I can't protect you on this point. Yang Chendong saw Kuang Ye's awkwardness. He knew that if he didn't make things clear, everyone would be suspicious. Since that was the case, he might as well make things clear and dispel these people's suspicions. As soon as this was said, The officials who were originally curious withdrew their gazes and looked down, as if they did not care about what was going on outside. If they touched it, they would die. The price of curiosity was too high. It was so high that they couldn't bear it. Even Minister Kuang Yi became a lot more honest at this time and even apologized. This old man was reckless just now. It's my fault. It's fine. The ignorant are innocent. Just don't do it. Yang Chendong smiled and turned to Xiaofeng. Our emperor hasn't been rescued and we haven't achieved our goal. We'll have to trouble you. Since they were collaborators, he had to be careful with his words. Xiaofeng, who was somewhat uncomfortable with Yang Chendong's attitude and tone of discussion, hurriedly said, Okay, since we've taken 6th young master's money, of course we'll do it well. Everyone, listen up. Keep moving forward. A few hundred steps away, General Walla sat on his horse in a daze. Unknowingly, he already had the urge to pee, and it was almost flowing out uncontrollably. 50 to 60 cavalrymen were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Not a single one of them was able to get within 90 paces. They all died. One had to know that all of them had died without a single survivor. This had never happened before in previous battles. No one had even thought that such a situation would occur. But now, the truth had appeared. Again, let's go together and kill all of them. General Walla was angry. He didn't know that the emperor of the great Ming dynasty was already close at hand. He only needed 2 or 3 more charges to capture him alive. He was frightened by Yang Chendong's team. He felt that if he didn't deal with these people, it would be like a fishbone stuck in his throat, and he wouldn't feel safe at all. Many of the remaining 200 or so Walla cavalry also saw this scene. At first, they were indeed shocked, but with the general's shout, the heroic spirit in their hearts was stimulated. Each of them stared at the more than 100 people with covetous eyes, and then the cavalry charged. More than 200 cavalrymen against more than 100 people, and all of them were infantrymen. Moreover, there were no obstacles on the plains. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Once the speed of the horses increased, the cavalry swords in their hands would only need to lightly slash and a big head would fly. Ah! All kinds of screams were heard, and the Walla cavalry's charge began. With the help of the speed of the horses, the distance between the two sides was quickly shortened. Be careful, be careful. Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other important officials were staring at the scene in front of them. Although they were already sitting on their horses, they still felt their bodies trembling. This was because they really didn't know how these mercenaries, as mentioned by Yang Chendong, would deal with more than 2 times the number of soldiers. This was naturally because they didn't understand these firearms. Their past experience told them that the power of firearms was indeed not small, but their weakness was also quite obvious. That was, after firing a shot, they had to reload. In this way, when facing more than 2 times the number of enemies, the firearm soldiers didn't have the slightest advantage. Raise your guns, ready, to fire. Different from the previous time, this time, Xiaofeng also raised the 95 style in his hand. The increase in the number of enemies made him want to join in the battle. However, this action of his had indeed caused the other Longfeng members to show dissatisfaction. It was just more than 2 times the number of enemies, and they really didn't care about it. The battalion commander clearly wanted to satisfy his craving. Naturally, no one could guess the thoughts of the Longfeng. Just when everyone thought that the battle was going to end badly, gunshots rang out. First, it was a volley of shots, and almost half of the enemy's troops were eliminated. Then, the gunshots were no longer as orderly as before, but it only gave the impression that there were a few more gunshots. Next, on the entire battlefield, only General Walla was escaping on his horse. At the most crucial moment, the general became afraid. He relied on his superb horsemanship to hide his body on the horse, and only then did he manage to dodge the shot. However, in front of the most elite Longfeng, since you were already identified as a target, how could you escape? Even if you managed to dodge the first shot, you wouldn't be able to dodge the second. Xiaofeng raised his gun, and after his breathing calmed down, he moved his right index finger. After a crisp paw sound, the healthy horse fell to the ground. Once the healthy horse fell, General Walla naturally fell off the horse, then quickly got up and continued to run. However, after another gunshot, The body that was moving forward suddenly fell to the ground, and there was no more movement from it. The second shot was still fired by Xiao Feng. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could kill the target with one shot, so he only shot the horse to prepare himself for the next shot. 2 consecutive shots from the same gun finally killed General Walla, but at the same time, it opened Kuang Ye's eyes. Originally, he could tell that this gun was different from the guns in the Great Ming Dynasty, but he never expected that this gun could fire continuously and from such a long distance with such accuracy. This scene was tantamount to giving him a solid lesson. Although he was not out of danger yet, at this time, he was already considering whether he could buy such firearms from the army. If that was the case, why would the Great Ming Dynasty be afraid of a strong enemy? Xiao Feng's performance won Yang Qindong's applause. Not bad. Although it was only 2 words, it was enough to make Xiao Feng's face glow. He was even happier than if he had received a military medal. This was the 6th young master's praise. If Longsong and Gao Xiong knew about it, they would probably be envious. Xiao Feng, who was satisfied, felt even more motivated. He immediately ordered, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Search and move forward. If you find any danger, you don't have to report it. Deal with it yourself." This was equivalent to handing the right to fire to the individual. The 100 Longfeng members immediately became excited. Their eyes kept searching for the enemy who might not be completely dead yet. Perhaps it was because their previous shooting skills were too accurate, but along the way, they didn't find a single enemy that was not dead. This made the soldiers feel like they were not satisfied. On the contrary, Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other important officials who followed them all the way breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. With such a powerful mercenary group accompanying them, their safety should be much more guaranteed. After more than 300 steps, Zhu Qizhen finally took off his armor and appeared in everyone's line of sight in a yellow robe. Compared to his usual high and mighty appearance, at this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. His clothes were disheveled, and there was even a small bruise on his face. The bruise was probably caused by falling to the ground. In short, he was currently in a sorry state. When he saw Yang Qindong and the others, his originally lifeless eyes immediately became filled with a strong desire for life. "Beloved official Yang, we are here. We are here. Check the injuries of the others and protect His Majesty." Yang Qindong also saw Zhu Qizhen. He then ran over to Zhu Qizhen's side, pretending to be terrified. Finally, he could grab Yang Qindong's hand. Zhu Qizhen said with a panicked expression, "Sir, you have misled me. You have misled me." At this moment, Zhu Qizhen still didn't forget to find a scapegoat for this great defeat. From this, it could be seen that no one who could become an emperor was simple. Yes, Eunuch Wang messed up the battle and caused a great defeat. He is guilty. However, he did it out of kindness. He just isn't good at leading troops. Yang Qindong knew how Zhu Qizhen felt about Wang Zhan. In history, this person was first captured and then sent back by Walla. He only regained the throne a few years later. However, once he took the throne, he didn't forget to build a colorful clay statue for Wang Zhan. He even built a monument for him. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how much Zhu Qizhen doted on Wang Zhan. He didn't believe that Zhu Qizhen would hate Wang Zhan just because of this great defeat. Furthermore, outsiders knew that he and Wang Zhan were working together. If he said anything overboard now, it would give people the impression that he was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Anyway, he had already been killed by Long Feng. What did it matter if he said something nice? When Yang Qindong said this, Zhu Qizhen looked at him with admiration. He then said, "Beloved official Yang, you should send someone to see if you can find Sir. Perhaps he is fighting with the enemy somewhere." Chapter 139. Oh, okay. Yang Qindong nodded his head in agreement when he saw that it was true. This action was strongly opposed by Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the others. "That won't do, Your Majesty. We don't have many soldiers by our side right now. If we send more people out and encounter the Walla cavalry, I'm afraid it will be disastrous. Your Majesty, please reconsider." If Wang Zhan was here, they wouldn't dare to say this. However, they knew that he wasn't here and that he was most likely dead. Even if it was for their own safety, they could say anything. That's right, that's right. We only have 100 mercenaries by our side. If we ask them for help, it will definitely divide our strength. If we encounter another enemy, we won't even know if we're dead or alive. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't send Lung Feng to search for Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was already dead. What was the point of searching for him? Thus, he pretended to be in a difficult position. When he mentioned that searching for Wang Zhen would divide their strength and put them in danger, Zhu Qizhen's desire to search for Wang Zhen wasn't as strong. After all, no matter how good their relationship was, if there was a possibility of losing their lives, they would have to think twice. Sigh, all right. I believe that Sir will be blessed by the heavens. He should be fine. Zhu Qizhen was forced to give up on searching for Wang Zhen. However, he then looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Beloved official Yang, who are these people? How did they have the strength to kill so many Walla cavalry and come to my side? Your Majesty, please forgive this subject for his innocence." Yang Chendong knew that this was an excellent opportunity to reveal the identities of Xiao Feng and the others. Of course, he wouldn't miss it. Thus, he pretended to be guilty as he spoke. "Sigh, beloved official Yang, why are you doing this? You saved me. This is a great merit. How can I blame you?" Zhu Qizhen grabbed Yang Chendong and didn't let him kneel down. Instead, he spoke with an excited expression. It had to be said that Zhu Qizhen had a way of grasping people's hearts. Just like those words just now, anyone who heard it would be inexplicably grateful, and even have the thought of going through water and treading on fire to repay the emperor's kindness. But who was Yang Chendong? In the future, being a monarch was just a status symbol to him. It was absolutely impossible for him to swear loyalty because of this. At the very least, it was not something that an incapable ruler like Zhu Qizhen could do. In his heart, he didn't take Zhu Qizhen's words to heart, but on the surface, he pretended to be extremely touched and said, "How could this subject save the emperor? It's clear that the emperor is blessed by the heavens," which led this subject to rush over. Zhu Qizhen's face lit up with joy after hearing those words. His fearful expression seemed to have relaxed quite a bit. "Your Majesty, the reason why I said I was guilty was because I was afraid of death. That's why I spent a lot of money to hire these foreign mercenaries. They only recognize money and not people. In their eyes, there is no distinction between country and region. They will work for whoever can pay them. Your Majesty also knows that this subject doesn't lack money. I did it for the sake of my own safety, but I didn't report it to Your Majesty in advance, which is also a crime." There was a dignified opportunity to say the identity of Xiao Feng and the others to Zhu Qizhen. As long as he knew, this matter would be legalized. Sure enough, when Zhu Qizhen heard this, he nodded with an understanding look. "Good, beloved official Yang is always prepared for a rainy day. But I just don't know how much they are so powerful." Zhu Qizhen wasn't the only one who thought this way. The other ministers were also very curious. After seeing the power of this mercenary army, they really wanted to know how much it was. In fact, the one who was most concerned about it was Zhu Qizhen. Although he didn't see it personally, to be able to come in front of him in the midst of the chaos, they must have some ability. Then if everyone could hire such a powerful army, wouldn't it mean that they had the capital to rebel? How could he not pay attention to it? Feeling everyone's gaze on him, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "Your Majesty, coincidentally, they weren't hired by me in the beginning. They were barbarians from overseas who did business with me. This time, they were in charge of delivering goods to the skies beyond trading company. When I met them, the army was about to go to war. I discussed it with them and asked them to protect me for 10,000 taels per person. If it weren't for this coincidence, I'm afraid that they wouldn't be interested in such a small amount of money. 10,000 taels per person, 100 people would be 1,000,000 taels." After hearing this, Kuang Yi and Wang Zhuo couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Especially Wang Zhuo. As the Minister of Revenue, he had a clear understanding of the great Ming dynasty's money. The value of the money that passed through his hands every year was very large. However, even he was shocked when he heard the price, not to mention the other important ministers. This answer also shocked Zhu Qizhen so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. 1,000,000 taels of silver just to protect him? This Yang Chendong was really too rich. Of course, he was probably the only person in the entire court who could afford such a price. After all, Whether it was the immortal abode or the skies beyond trading company, large amounts of money flowed in every day. This answer also allowed Zhu Qizhen to breathe a sigh of relief. The higher the price of the mercenary army, the more relieved he would be. It also showed that not everyone had the ability to hire this army and achieve great things to threaten him. While they were talking, Tiger's Mane walked up to Yang Chendong. Young master, apart from General Fanzhong's injuries, the rest of the Tiger's Mane didn't continue, but his continuous shaking of his head explained everything. When Yang Chendong heard this, he didn't make any decisions. Instead, he looked at Zhu Qizhen with an expression that said, "You're the emperor, so you should make the decisions. Forget it, just let them be. When we return to the palace, we will reward their families greatly. As for what happens next, beloved Minister Yang, and my other beloved ministers, what do you all think?" Zhu Qizhen was very satisfied with Yang Chendong's attitude, but he really didn't have any ideas right now. After the army's defeat, his mind was already in a mess. Although he said he was asking the ministers, everyone's eyes were actually on Yang Chendong. It was clear that they had long since run out of ideas. In a situation where they were surrounded by enemies, there seemed to be no path out that was safe. Since he was the one who came up with the idea, Yang Chendong didn't hold back. He knew that the longer they stayed here, the greater the danger they would be in. Previously, because all of the Walla cavalry had been wiped out, the news didn't spread. But once the Walla army found out about their tracks, once the army pressed on, with only 100 people, there was still danger. All right, since the emperor has given this important task to this subject will give his own suggestion. Our current position is naturally the closest to Huailai County, but that place is also the most dangerous. The Walla will definitely be on guard against us and will definitely arrange a large number of troops there. Then we might as well do the opposite and go to Yuzhou. Yang Chendong acted as if he had a card up his sleeve. In reality, this was also his plan from the beginning. That's right, catch them off guard and attack them when they least expect it. The art of war says that what is false and what is true and what is false. I'm sure no one will think that we will go to Yuzhou. After hearing Yang Chendong's suggestion, Minister of War Kuang Yi immediately supported it. Yang Chendong and Kuang Yi, who understood the art of war, both had the same idea. Zhu Qizhen's heart was set. All right, then we will go to Yuzhou. After saying that, he got up and prepared to leave. But he was stopped by Yang Chendong. What is the meaning of this, Minister Yang? Zhu Qizhen's expression changed greatly. He was afraid that this person would have evil intentions towards him. If that was the case, then with only the injured General Fanzhong, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect himself. Yang Chendong, what are you doing? Fanzhong stepped forward with his hammer in hand, in a questioning manner. But before he could get close, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Wu had already surrounded him from 3 directions. It was guaranteed that if he took another step forward, his blood would splatter 5 feet and he would fall to the ground and die. The situation suddenly became tense. Yang Chendong hurriedly gave Tiger's Mane and the others a look to retreat, then half knelt in front of Zhu Qizhen. Your Majesty, this subject doesn't have any other intentions. It's just that if we are going to escape, Your Majesty must change your clothes. Change my clothes? Why? Zhu Qizhen was puzzled. Your Majesty, wearing a yellow robe will easily attract other people's attention. It will also easily attract the Walla cavalry's pursuit. Yang Chendong cursed the other party's pig head in his heart, but on the surface, he looked like he was advising him. Oh. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen came to his senses and nodded. That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. Since that's the case, we will take off the yellow robe. Yes, Your Majesty not only has to take off the robe, but also put it on someone else to confuse the enemy's attention. Yang Chendong's words shocked Kuang Yi and the other officials, causing them to become nervous. They first looked at each other, then slowly lowered their heads. These people's reactions fell into the eyes of Yang Chendong and Zhu Qizhen, and the latter was naturally unhappy. The former lowered his head and smiled, but when he looked up, he had already returned to his serious state. Your Majesty can put the yellow robe on Hu Bin, who died with a similar figure to you, to create a false image and use it to confuse the enemy. Hearing that they were going to let the dead wear clothes, Kuang Yi and the others raised their heads one by one, and their expressions returned to normal. Zhu Qijin suddenly understood and said, "That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. This way, the Walla army will think that we have already ascended to heaven. This way, no one will pursue us." Chapter 140. Your Majesty is wise. Yang Chendong and several other important officials all knelt on the ground with respectful expressions. "Ha ha ha, officials, please rise. I will take off my clothes now." Zhu Qijin seemed to have found the feeling of being an emperor again. With a laugh, he took off his yellow robe. Soon, Hu Bin, whose body was similar to Zhu Qijin's, was brought in front of everyone. More importantly, his face had been cut several times. Everyone worked together and put the yellow robe on the body of the dead. Then, they identified the direction of Yuzhou and hurried over. About 2 hours after they left, a group of about 500 Walla cavalry rushed over. Among them was a eunuch, wearing a eunuch uniform. This person was Xining, and could be considered an important eunuch in the group. Xining followed the army out. When the chaos broke out, he was unfortunately caught by the Walla cavalry. Just as they were about to cut him to death, he shouted out his identity and said that he could help the Walla army find Ming Zong. In this way, the Ming dynasty would be within their reach. Xining's words were too enticing. When the Walla general heard it, he couldn't help but be moved. Thus, he didn't kill him. Instead, he brought him to search for news of Zhu Qijin. This group of people was led by the Walla king, and Xining was among them. When they arrived at the battlefield, the bright yellow robe was immediately noticed by everyone. Xining got off his horse and walked over to the corpse that was already unrecognizable. He carefully searched it and found Zhu Qijin's jade pendant. He immediately said with joy, "General, this is the Ming dynasty emperor, but he is already dead." Dead. Sigh. Hearing that Zhu Qijin was dead, a trace of hatred appeared on the Walla king's face. It was clear that a dead person had no effect on him. Noticing the disappointment on the competition king's face, Xining, who was afraid that he would lose his life, rolled his eyes and said, "General, although the Ming dynasty emperor is already dead, we still have the jade pendant in our hands. We can still do something. I presume that this chaotic news will cause the Ming army to panic, and if we can use this chance, we might be able to attack the capital. Sir is very familiar with that place, with its countless treasures and beauties." Speaking of the prosperity of the capital as a former emissary, how could the periodical king not know of it? Immediately, his expression changed from worry to joy as he said, "Good, good. Let's go. Follow me to see the leader. We are preparing to attack the capital of the great Ming dynasty." Ha ha ha. Zhu Qijin had intentionally left the waist pendant behind, saying that it was to make it more realistic. He didn't expect that it would come in handy and become an item to identify his identity. At this time, Great Ming Ingzong, who had changed into a bright tiger robe, was currently heading towards Shangxi Yuzhou with Yang Chendong and his group. Even if they didn't choose to walk to the front, they still encountered 2 of Walla's cavalry units. Each side had 100 cavalrymen, but when they met the cold front, they were like live targets. Before they could see clearly what kind of formation was on the other side and who was on the other side, they were all killed from afar. This was also the first time Zhu Qijin saw the power of the cold front at such a close distance. For a moment, his heart was filled with fear. But when he thought that they were now being used by him, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Now that they had more healthy horses and more food from the bodies of the Walla cavalry, everyone began to speed up after eating and drinking to their heart's content. Regardless of whether it was day or night, they headed straight for Yuzhou. Xining was brought to his elder brother, Yeshin, who was also the leader of the Walla, by the periodical king. Yeshin was tall and sturdy, and there was a sense of superiority in his eyes. His eyes were deep and sharp, and when he looked at Xining, he was so scared that his heart jumped. "You said that this belongs to your Ming emperor?" Yeshin asked casually as he played with the seemingly expensive waist pendant in his hand. Yes, Lord Chief, this belongs to our Ming emperor. He has already been killed by the brave Walla cavalry." Xining knelt on the ground like a servant. After saying this, he was afraid that the other party wouldn't believe him, so he added, "This little one is a eunuch who follows the Ming emperor. so of course I wouldn't be wrong. Also, this little one is a Nuzanren, not a Han. I have long been looking forward to the army trampling on the great Ming dynasty and repeating the glory of the grassland people. Xining was really afraid that he would die. At this moment, he didn't want to say anything nice, but he was afraid that Yeshen would kill him if he was unhappy. Xining's attitude made Yeshen believe him. Even if the Ming emperor is dead, do you think that their capital is now in chaos? Previously, because the leader of the periodical king's guards, Tuj, angered Yang Chendong, all the spies of the Wara in the great Ming dynasty's capital were exposed and killed. If he wanted to understand the situation of the great Ming dynasty, he could only ask this little eunuch in front of him. Xining was afraid that Yeshen would kill him without asking any questions. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to show his value. Now, as long as the other party was willing to ask him, it proved that he was useful and his life was not in danger. And in order to better express himself, and also to show his importance, he, who was kneeling on the ground, analyzed, "Leader, what the Ming dynasty does not lack the least is the emperor. The size of the imperial family is beyond our imagination. Even if the current emperor is dead, they can still elect a new emperor at any time." What? Xining's answer made Yeshen very unhappy. Doesn't that mean that it's useless for us to kill the Ming emperor? No, it's not like that. Xining shook his head like a rattled drum. Although the royal family of the Ming dynasty is very large, it's not difficult for them to elect a new emperor. However, it's difficult for a new emperor to gain power in a short period of time, and this is our opportunity. Therefore, we can't announce the death of the Ming emperor immediately. If we do, it will only give the other party more time to prepare. We can first march to the capital, and when the army reaches the city, we can announce the death of the Ming emperor. This way, even if they elect a new emperor, it will be difficult for them to form any resistance. At that time, the new regime will be replaced by the old regime, and it will be chaotic. This way, we can suppress the city with our army. At that time, this lowly one can persuade my friends, and perhaps we can open the city gates without shedding a drop of blood and completely enter the capital. Zhu Qijin was already dead, and to Xining, he had no hope. Even if he could safely return to the capital, how could another emperor trust him as much as Ingzong did? Perhaps the other eunuchs would be eager to kill him. Since there was no way out, he might as well vote for Walla. With his contributions in planning, once Walla succeeded, he might be able to become a powerful eunuch like Wang Zhan. At this moment, Xining seemed to see the glorious light of the future. In order to achieve this goal, he really did his best to plan for Yeshen. Okay. After hearing Xining's words, Yeshen was also moved. Originally, he only wanted to attack the border of the Ming dynasty to show his strength. However, he didn't expect to win the battle and even kill the Ming emperor. Now that he had the opportunity to enter the capital of the Ming dynasty, how could he give it up? Thinking back, he once asked the Ming emperor to marry a princess to him for the purpose of seeking peace, but he was rejected. Now, if he could enter the capital, wouldn't he be able to choose all the princesses? He would also be able to take revenge for the humiliation he suffered back then. Xining's proposal was accepted by Yeshen. Next, Walla's army began to clean up the battlefield. In terms of firearms alone, there were 14 great general cannons, 2,161 divine cannons, and 4,223 divine spears. In addition to other military necessities, it could be said that the harvest was quite bountiful. In the Ming army, Duke Ingong Zhangfu, Marquis Taining Chening, Prince Consort Jingyuan, Count Pingxiang Chen Huai, Count Xiangqing Li Zhan, Count Suiyan Chen Sun, Count Shu Shunrong, Governor Liang Cheng, Wang Gue, Scholar Chao Nai, Zhang Yi, Hanlin Academy attendant Scholar Zhang Yi, Left Governor Gong Quanan of the Office of Transmission, Dai Qingzhu of Taichung Temple, Wang Yijiu, Bao Yangzhua of the Imperial Secretariat, Yao Xian, Bao Hui, Censor Yu Gong, Pan Cheng, Qian Yu, Censor, Zhang Hong, Huang Cheng, Wei Zhen, Xia Cheng, Yin Hong, Tong Kund, Sun Qing, Lin Xiangfeng, Lang Zhong Qi Wang, Feng Shuiming, Minister Counselor Wang Jian, Cheng Siwen, Cheng Cheng, Cheng Cheng, Lu Duan, Manager Yu Jian, Zhang Tang, Zhang Xian, Deputy Ma Yu of the Supreme Court, Yin Chong, pedestrian Luo Ruyang, Xia Guanjing of the Imperial Astronomer, Lu Xian of the Imperial Astronomer, Li Gong, Shi Yu, and others all died in the battle. In this battle, more than half of the Ming army died, and a large amount of supplies were plundered by Yes Hin. Only the minister of the Supreme Court, Xiao Weizhen, and a few others luckily escaped. Then there were the 9 important officials that Yang Chenong had saved. The 500,000 soldiers left behind by Ming Chengzu Zhu had been completely wiped out, and the 3 most elite battalions had also been destroyed. The development of firearms for the army had been greatly hindered, and the gates to the capital had been opened. In the history of the Ming dynasty, this battle was known as the defeat of Timur. This defeat had far-reaching effects, becoming the turning point for the Ming dynasty from the early to the middle stages. In the capital, when the news of Timur's defeat reached the capital, everyone felt like they had been hit in the head with a stick. The streets were abuzz with discussion, and a chaotic situation was about to unfold. The imperial court was in an uproar, but no one was in charge. The imperial court was in a state of panic, and Zhu Qiyu, who was temporarily in charge of court affairs, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He had originally thought that he was only temporarily in charge of court affairs, and if there were any problems, the officials would deal with them. He was just putting on an act, waiting for Emperor Zhu Qizhen to return, so that he could report on his task perfectly and continue to be a king. But he had never imagined that the army would be defeated, and defeated so miserably. According to the news from the front lines, the field was littered with corpses. Now, there was no news of Emperor Zhu Qizhen. To say something disrespectful, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Since no one knew whether the emperor was dead or alive, his burden had undoubtedly become very heavy. Just like now, all the officials were asking him for his opinion, causing him to feel uneasy and unsure of how to respond. Chapter 141. Prince Qing. The military report says that Walla's army is coming to the capital. Baiyang Pass is in an emergency. If we don't do anything about it, Zijing Pass and Juyong Pass will be in danger. At that time, Walla's army will come to the capital. Wang Zhi, the Minister of Personnel, as one of the old officials, stood out bravely and told Zhu Qiyu about the danger of the current situation. Then what should we do? Zhu Qiyu, who had never been in charge of the court, was at a loss. Prince Yu, Minister Wang, we should be discussing the whereabouts of His Majesty and whether he will be able to return. Hu Xiao, the Minister of the Ministry of Rites, stepped forward with his ceremonial tablet in hand and spoke with a worried expression. A snake can't do without a head. No one could make the final decision. No one could think of the same thing. Minister Hu is right. The most important thing now is to find out where His Majesty is and where the other officials are. Jinlian, the Minister of Justice, and Sherpu, the Minister of Works, both held their tablets and raised their heads high to express their thoughts. Well, if that's the case, go and find out where His Majesty is. Zhu Qiyu, Prince Cheng, nodded in agreement. If he knew that Zhu Qizhen was still alive, he would find a way to bring him back to preside over the situation. If he was gone, Zhu Qiyu didn't think too much about it for now. The court meeting ended in such a hurry that they did not manage to come to a conclusion. The spies of the Eastern Palace Guards and the Brocade Guards began to move. However, facing the Walla's army on the battlefield, it was not possible to find out the real information in a short time. Zhu Qiyu returned to the Nangong Palace with a worried look. The Nangong Palace was a side hall in the palace. Because it was only in a corner of the palace, few people came here. When Zhu Qizhen had left, he had arranged for his younger brother to stay here as a warning. Because the crown prince was only 2 years old and had just been established, he couldn't supervise the country. Therefore, Zhu Qiyu was asked to stay here. But it was just to let him stand there as a puppet. It was impossible for him to have any power or have any thoughts about the imperial power. The arrangement of the remote Nangong Palace was a warning to Zhu Qiyu that she had to grasp her own position and not overstep her authority. Zhu Qiyu did not have any thoughts about being assigned to Nangong's place. He was very clear about his own position, but that was based on Zhu Qizhen's triumphant return. Naturally, he had to return to his seat. But now, Zhu Qiyu's mood was very complicated. She walked back to the Nangong Palace, where she was temporarily staying. She happened to see a few eunuchs not far away. They seemed to be talking about her and pointing at something. For a moment, anger rose in his heart. It was true that he was a puppet, but at the same time, he was also a prince. How could he allow some little eunuchs to order him around? For a moment, anger rose from his heart, and a trace of killing intent appeared in his heart. However, this killing intent was forcefully suppressed as soon as it arose. Now that Ingzong's fate was unknown, what if he was on the way back? If he killed a little eunuch in the palace without permission, wouldn't that give him something to use against him? Zhu Qiyu knew very well that this elder brother of his was not very broad-minded. Zhu Qiyu wanted to keep the peace and suppress his anger. However, at this moment, a great eunuch in a python robe suddenly appeared from the side. He looked coldly at the four little eunuchs who were gathered together and discussing. You don't do anything in the palace, but talk nonsense here. Do you really have nothing better to do? Come on, drag them away, and give each of them 40 strokes of the military rod. 40 strokes of the military rod was tantamount to taking their lives. When the four little eunuchs heard this, their expressions changed dramatically. They hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. However, a few little eunuchs had already come over and pulled them up one by one and dragged them away. The little eunuchs dared to look down on him and paid the price with their lives. Zhu Qiyu felt relieved and vented a lot of the anger that had accumulated over the past few days. Your Highness Prince Cheng, I'm here to pay my respects. Just as Zhu Qiyu was feeling relieved, the eunuch who had shouted just now came to Zhu Qiyu with a slight bow. To be able to wear a python robe, needless to say, his status among the eunuchs was extremely high. In fact, there were only two people in the palace who could do this. One was Wang Zhan, who had already been killed, and the other was Jin Ying. Jin Ying, from Annan. After entering the palace, he served Taizong, Ranzong, Xuanzong, and Ingzong. In the last years of Yongle, when he was about 30 years old, he was promoted to the right supervisor of the ceremony directorate. After Ranzong ascended the throne, the people under the name of Zhang Ding, who was about to be exiled, were all rewarded to him, including real estate and trees, as well as the people and land of his son-in-law Tian Go-er. In the 7th year of Xuanda, 1432, because of his loyalty and diligence, he was also given a decree of exemption from death. Later, he was given a silver record and promoted to a eunuch of the ceremony directorate. Ingzong Zhuqizhen was only 9 years old when he ascended the throne. Eunuch Wang Zhan would play with him, and he doted on Wang Zhan the most. Thus, Wang Zhan took out Jin Ying and the other eunuchs to take charge of the ceremony directorate. Jin Ying could only give in to him everywhere. Rather than giving in to him everywhere, it was better to say that he was hibernating. This was because he had always been the eunuch in charge of the ceremony directorate. Moreover, he was the first eunuch and enjoyed a very high position. It was just that Wang Zhan was in the limelight for a while, so no one paid attention to him. Jin Ying's sudden appearance at this time, and it looked like he was standing up for Zhu Qiyu. The meaning behind this was worth pondering. Zhu Qiyu's impression of Jin Ying was quite good. Not for anything else, but because this person was one of the few people who treated him with respect. Perhaps it was because they were both oppressed, or perhaps it was because they had the same experience and knew what hibernation meant. So naturally, there were too many similarities. Many thanks, Eunuch Jin. Zhu Qiyu smiled and spoke to Jin Ying with a smile in his eyes. At the same time, he bowed slightly to express his gratitude. Aya, you can't do that. Yuang has a precious body and is in charge of court affairs. How can you be so polite to a eunuch like me? Jin Ying's face was filled with fear and trepidation. His head was extremely low, as if he was about to make intimate contact with the ground with his knees. At the mention of being in charge of court affairs, Zhu Qiyu's expression turned bitter. His starry eyes were filled with power as he said, "What? Is Eunuch Jin also here to make fun of my incompetence in court?" Jin Ying, who was said to be knowledgeable, could not be more familiar with this feeling. After all, he had experienced 4 emperors. But at this time, he still pretended to be very afraid and shook his head violently. Your Highness Yuang, please forgive me. This subject does not have such thoughts. On the contrary, this subject believes that Yuang was just born at the wrong time. Otherwise, with your great wisdom, It would not be difficult for you to become a wise ruler. Shu. Zhu Qiyu was really frightened by Jin Ying's words. He looked around nervously. Eunuch Jin, don't harm this prince. Your Highness Yuang, don't worry. No matter what, this subject has been in the palace for so many years and has some power of my own. There is no third person within 100 steps of this place. You can rest assured. Jin Ying's face was full of confidence. This time, he had come to find Zhu Qiyu, taking a certain risk. He had also come to express his loyalty and surrender. Since that was the case, how could he not make the necessary preparations? Let's go into the hall and talk. Zhu Qiyu knew that if Jining dared to say this, it must have been arranged. After all, once Zhu Qijin found out that he had been in close contact with eunuchs in private, he would be suspected. He did not know what would happen to him, but Jining regarded himself as a subject, so his intentions were clear. Jining had been in the palace for so many years, so it was impossible for him not to know something that even Zhu Qiyu himself knew. And since he still dared to come, he must have something to say to him. At that moment, he strode into the hall with a considerate look. Jining followed half a step behind him. He followed closely behind with his head lowered. But if he was willing to raise his head at this moment, he would be able to see a very determined expression on his face. It was determination. Because this time, Jin Ying had come to persuade Zhu Qiyu to take the throne. Regardless of whether Zhu Qijin was alive or not, and whether he could return to the palace, in Jin Ying's eyes, he was already a useless person. The change of imperial power had always been a matter of swords and blades. Since you dared to leave the palace, you should be prepared for a turtle dove to take over your nest. If you wanted to blame someone, you could only blame Zhu Qijin for trusting and doting on Wang Jin too much. Since you doted on someone else and did not give yourself a way out, don't blame him for looking for another way. Then, in the hall of the Nangong Palace, Zhu Qiyu and Jining chatted for a long time. No one knew what they talked about, but the various events that followed were enough to deduce what they had said and what they had planned. The Hu residence. After Hu Xiao and Hu Zhongning returned to the residence from court, they gave strict orders that no one was to leave the residence without their permission. Even the maids in charge of buying groceries and cooking in the residence had to set a time limit. When they went out, they had to bring a few more servants with them. With the situation at court in chaos, no one knew what would happen next. Based on Hu Zhao's many years of experience as an official, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. First, they would wait and see. Then, they would place heavy bets. This was a wise move. Because of this order, the atmosphere in the entire Hu residence became very tense and oppressive. In Hu Yan's room in the backyard, she was pacing back and forth anxiously. After a while, the servant girl, Xiao Qing, stumbled into the room with an anxious look on her face. "Little Qing, what did you find out? Is there any news of him?" When she saw her personal servant girl, Hu Yan stepped forward and grabbed her hands. Her face was full of anxiety and worry. Chapter 142. Me. Young Mississippi. The main, side, and back doors of the estate have all been closed. Without master's orders, no one is allowed to leave. Little Qing panted as she recounted what she had seen to Hu Yan. When she heard that all the doors of the estate had been closed, Hu Yan had a bad premonition. If nothing major had happened, such a change wouldn't have occurred. Her expression couldn't help but change slightly. When she looked at Little Qing, there was a hint of anxiousness. "I asked you to gather information. What's the result?" "This." Little Qing shook her head. "I couldn't leave the estate, so I couldn't get any more information. However, when I asked Lieutenant Sun Chuang, he said that it seemed that the front lines had been defeated." "Defeated? Seems?" Hu Yan's heart skipped a beat. Has this information been confirmed? As she spoke, she tightened her grip on Little Qing's wrist. "Young miss, you also know that with Sun Chuang's status, what he knows is limited. Young miss, hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." Little Qing's eyes were hazy with tears. Hu Yan's grip had truly hurt her. Hu Yan mechanically released her grip and sat back down in her chair. Her eyes were empty as she said, "He'll be fine. He'll be fine." Quite a few people in the capital were reacting in the same way as Hu Yan. This was especially true for the hundreds of family members of the officials who had accompanied the army. They could vaguely sense that something was wrong. Even though there was still no confirmation, the atmosphere had already turned icy cold. As a result, the business of the immortal abode and the realm beyond heaven began to wane. In the past, the seats had always been in short supply, but now they had lost at least 30% of their customers. They no longer had to wait in line to spend money. 5 days later, amidst this oppressive atmosphere, a group of soldiers arrived at the gates of the capital. The leader had a strange appearance. He had a square face, a tall stature, and a knee-length beard. He was skilled in horseback riding and archery, and a large saber hung beside his sturdy horse. He exuded a fierce killing intent. However, at this moment, there wasn't the slightest bit of killing intent in his eyes. There was only anxiety. He was Datong Prefecture's Governor Shihong. Shihong, Marquis Xining Song-ing, Wu Jinbo Zhumian, and the others fought against the Walla cavalry at Yanghaku. After the deaths of Song and Zhu, he had returned alone. Along the way, he had recruited soldiers and brought back several hundred cavalry. This time, he had returned to the capital to atone for his crimes by performing meritorious deeds. Shihong came back with the latest news from the front line. When Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, found out about this, he immediately summoned all the fourth rank and above officials in the capital to the palace for a discussion. In the imperial court, Shihong knelt before Zhu Qiyu and recounted in detail what he had experienced and what he had seen. After he finished speaking, he continued to kowtow to the ground. As he kowtowed, he said, "Your humble servant is incompetent. At this moment, Shihong was acting like a loyal and brave general. Instead of saying that he was repenting, it was better to say that he was showing off his achievements. General Shi, please rise. This prince wants to ask you, how is the emperor? How are the other officials?" Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, asked anxiously. However, others did not know that there was a ball of fire burning in his chest at this moment. "Your Highness Imperial Tutor Prince, the Emperor has ascended to heaven." Shihong slowly raised his head and blinked his eyes hard. But no matter how one looked at him, he did not look like he was about to cry. His expression was still vivid, giving people the feeling that he was very sad and in pain. What? Zhu Qiyu's body trembled when he heard this. He almost slipped off his chair. Fortunately, Jining, who was standing to the side, helped him in time, so he did not make a fool of himself. At this moment, the other officials were also shocked. Some of the timid ones even knelt on the ground and began to cry. There were also some officials who could not believe Shihong's words. After all, according to the battle report, the Vola cavalry and infantry only had 60 to 70,000 soldiers. However, the Great Ming Empire had sent an army of 500,000 soldiers, including many elite troops. How could they be defeated? Moreover, they were defeated so thoroughly that even the lives of the emperor and hundreds of officials were lost? Governor Shi, did you see the death of the emperor and the officials with your own eyes? Among the officials, Wang Zhi, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was relatively calm. He really could not understand how they could have been defeated so miserably when they had outnumbered the enemy by 7 to 8 times. No, this official did not see the death of the emperor and the officials with my own eyes. But because of Wang Zhan's careless command, the army did not care about each other. The general did not know the soldiers, and the soldiers did not know the general. In addition, there was a lack of water and food, and the morale was low. When faced with the elite cavalry of the Walla, they fled or were injured. It was chaos. This official did not know where the emperor and the officials were at that time. But later, when we fought with a small number of the Walla cavalry, I learned the news from the captives. This official did not dare to delay any longer, so I killed my way out with my men. Shihong kept beautifying himself as he spoke. He gave people the impression that he had given up on fighting the enemy in order to bring back news. But in reality, he had heard this news from some of the great Ming dynasty's deserters who understood the Walla language. Impudent! How can you insult my father like this? Just as Shihong finished speaking, 3 people walked out from the crowd. They were the commander of the Brocade Guards, Ma Shun, primary 3rd rank, the commander of the Brocade Guards, Wang Shan, secondary 3rd rank, and the commander of the brocade guards, Wang Lin, primary 4th rank. When the two of them heard that Shi Hong had put all the blame on Wang Zhan, how could they let it go? One of them was Wang Zhan's confidant, and the other was Wang Zhan's nephew. They were deeply indebted to Wang Zhan and would not allow anyone to speak ill of Wang Zhan. As soon as the two of them jumped out, Jin Ing, who was standing next to the throne, raised his eyebrows. He had been waiting for this moment for far too long. It was precisely because of these people that his authority had been completely stripped away. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge and eliminate his dissidents, how could he let go of such an opportunity? He had even summoned officials of the 4th rank and above to discuss this matter precisely to lure out Wang Zhan's confidants. If Yang Chendong were here, he would definitely be suspicious. History had already begun to deviate from its original course. In reality, because of his appearance, many things had already changed. It was precisely because of the establishment of the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode that Wang Zhan was able to earn money so quickly that he found it difficult to put anyone aside from the emperor. This made Jining even more dissatisfied with him than in history. The three of them stepped out at the same time and glared at Shi Hong, giving him a fright. I'm only speaking the truth. What do you want to do? What do we want to do? Scoundrels like you who spread false information should be put to death. Men, drag him away and behead him. Ma Shun's gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared at Shi Hong. He looked like he wouldn't give up until he had skinned him alive. As soon as he spoke, 6 tall, burly embroidered uniform guards walked in. They were dressed in flying robes. As soon as the embroidered uniform guards appeared, the atmosphere in the imperial court froze. The expressions of all the officials changed greatly. It was clear that they had all suffered at the hands of these people before. They were terrified from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, no one noticed that the Mastiff Prince, Zhu Qiyu, and Jin Ing, the eunuch of the ceremony directorate, were exchanging glances. It was clear that they had already known that something like this was going to happen. Zhu Qiyu nodded lightly, as if in tacit agreement. Jin Ing took a step forward, and his voice suddenly grew louder. Come, why aren't you arresting these 3 traitors for disrupting the imperial court? Behead them as punishment. Jin Ing suddenly stood up and said that she wanted to kill 3 people instead of 1. For a moment, the emperor and his subjects were stunned. Even Ma Shun and the other 2 had a look of surprise in their eyes. They could not understand how Jin Ing could make a mistake in such a situation. They didn't understand earlier because the 6 embroidered uniform guards hadn't made a move yet. But when the 6 of them stepped forward and subdued Ma Shun, Wang Shan, and Wang Lin, they finally understood what was going on. Jin Ing, you traitor. What are you trying to do? Let me go immediately, or I'll make sure you're beheaded. Being subdued by 2 extremely strong embroidered uniform guards, Ma Shun resisted a few times without any success. So, he started cursing loudly. Jin Ing, who had been prepared for this, had a cold expression. He said in a disdainful tone, You're about to die, but you're still so arrogant. Come, drag him away and behead him. When the 6 strong embroidered uniform guards heard this, they dragged Ma Shun and the other 2 out of the imperial court. Not long after, 3 shouts came from outside. Needless to say, Ma Shun and the other 2 had been beheaded. Their most loyal lackeys had been killed. The officials were all trembling with fear, especially those who had previously sided with Wang Zhan. They were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. They didn't know if Jin Ing, who seemed to be in control of the imperial court, would suddenly attack them. Killing people was to establish authority and also to intimidate. Now it seemed that the effect was quite good. Jin Ing sighed softly in his heart. Don't blame me. You forced me to do this. After giving himself an explanation, he suddenly turned and knelt down in front of Zhu Qiyu, the Duke of Yin. Your Highness, the Duke of Yin, now that the Ing sect is in trouble, the great Ming is in danger. Please ascend the throne, preside over the situation, and lead the great Ming back to glory. When Jin Ing knelt down, the entire imperial court fell silent. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Obviously, this was something that no one had foreseen or prepared for. But this silence only lasted for a moment. Shi Hong suddenly pounded his head on the ground and shouted, This official requests the Duke of Yin to ascend the throne and establish the empire, with Shi Hong taking the lead. The officials who reacted quickly knelt down one by one and begged the Duke of Yin, Zhu Qiyu, to ascend the throne and become the emperor. Shi Hong had said that the Ming sect, Zhu Qizhen, had already died on the battlefield. Even so, someone had to be the emperor. Now it seemed that with the status of regent, the younger brother of the emperor, and the bloodline of the Zhu family, it was perfectly justified for him to inherit the empire. Chapter 143. With the situation settled, all the officials knelt on the ground and cheered. Since ancient times, there was a saying that there were 3 requests. Zhu Qiyu immediately rejected them. After that, the officials invited him, rejected him, and invited him a 3rd time. Only then was the matter settled. Immediately, everyone and Zhu Qiyu went to see the Empress Dowager to go through the final approval process. That day, Zhu Qiyu became the emperor. Because the war was imminent, the situation was urgent. The officials knelt on the ground and recognized Zhu Qiyu as the emperor. His title was Daizong, and his name was Jingtai. He made Yingzong's son, Zhu Jianxin, later Xinzong, the crown prince. This important imperial edict was passed down by Jin Ying. Now, Jin Ying had become a powerful official like Wang Zhun during Yingzong's time. Jin Ying also received the favor of Empress Dowager's son and the new emperor. Whether it was Wang Zhun or Jin Ying, this was the result of the system and environment. The Ming dynasty was an unprecedentedly powerful dynasty. This was why the emperor dared to give power to the eunuchs. Although the eunuchs of the Ming dynasty had so much power, when the emperor really wanted to punish them, he only needed to write an imperial edict and these eunuchs would be doomed eternally. Lu Jin and Wei Zhongxian both ended up like this. Thus, the emperor was not worried about the eunuchs being disloyal. Secondly, the emperor had no choice but to use the eunuchs. The Ming dynasty officials were very powerful. At their peak, they dared to publicly criticize the emperor. Although the emperor was the son of heaven and had unparalleled power, but in front of all the officials, he was all alone. In order to break the unity of the officials, the emperor could only use the eunuchs to restrict the power of the officials. Although the eunuchs were mostly dark, they all knew that the only thing they could rely on was the emperor. Thus, they were all loyal. Thus, to the emperor, the eunuchs were more reliable than the officials. Now that Jin Ying had taken the initiative, she should have immediately attacked Wang Zhun's faction. However, this was not the result of a peaceful development. It was the result of a crisis. At this time, the military report said that Walla's army was approaching. If the palace was in chaos now, it would be bad for the overall situation. In order to give Emperor Jing and Zhu Qiyu a good impression, Jin Ying didn't attack Wang Jinyu's supporters. Instead, she began to unite the majority of the people and prepared to fight the enemy together. It was because of his generosity that many eunuchs took the initiative to defect and change their allegiance. Even those who were loyal to Wang Zhun became much more well-behaved and hid among the crowd. For example, Wang Zhun's trusted eunuch of the imperial horse supervisor, Chen Guan, had become an old dog that didn't bite. He had become very obedient. Whenever Jin Ying gave an order, he would completely obey. There wasn't the slightest bit of difference. There were also eunuchs Chao Jixiang, Gao Rang, Mao Mu, and Qin Xingbao, the imperial horse directorate's chief eunuch, who were all very low-key. Don't cause trouble, and do your best to complete the tasks assigned to you. However, everyone could see that these people were still waiting to see the situation. They were waiting for the arrival of Tile's army before making a final decision. In this regard, Jin Ying didn't have any better ideas. Zhu Qiyu was willing to delegate power to her, but not without a bottom line. If he wanted to unify the group of eunuchs, which even Wang Zhun hadn't been able to do, she was afraid that the first unlucky one would be her. It was still the same saying, I can use you, but I also have to be wary of you. This was the basic attitude of the emperor towards eunuchs. Jin Ying became the eunuch in charge of power and was promoted to chief eunuch of the ceremony directorate by Zhu Qiyu. For a time, she held great power. Her fangs were unfurled. The group of eunuchs wasn't easy to move. They were all under the emperor's nose. If there was any wind blowing, it would be very difficult to hide. Thus, she began to move against the officials. She arranged for Lu Gue, who had just been promoted to commander of the Brocade Guard, to walk through the homes of the officials, looking for their weaknesses and problems to threaten. Lu Gue brought the new commander of the Brocade Guard, Han Ji, to visit the important officials one by one. The Minister of Works, Shi Pu, had originally gotten his position from Wang Zhen. After Wang Zhen fell from power, he used Lu Gue to bribe Jin Ying to keep his position. Jin Ying's family also asked for stone, grass, and other materials to build a private room for Jin Ying, and so on from the officials of the Military Preparation Office and internal envoy Yi Jingrong. Many of the important officials were threatened because of this. The lighter ones were given a sum of money to settle the matter. There were even some who were directly sent to prison. As the residents of the Minister of Rights, Ming, the Hu Manor also suffered a lot from Lu Gue and Han Ji. Not only did they give a large sum of money, Hu Chongning was also ordered to reflect on his mistakes at home on the grounds that he was suspended from his duties. Jining had made such a big move that some of the officials who liked to curry favor could no longer remain calm. They all thought of ways to establish a relationship with her. Among them was the head of the Hanlin Academy, Wang Go, who was also Yang Duo's husband. Wang Go had given all of his family's gold and silver to the new commander of the Brocade Guard, Han Ji. As a result, he had been promoted from the original 9th rank to the 7th rank editor. Not only had he been promoted, but he had also taken the position of his former superior, Wang Si. Although Wang Si's grandfather, the Minister of Appointments, Wang Ji, had also been threatened, he had only given money to ensure his safety and had not expressed his loyalty to Jin Ying. His position was not easy to move, but his family members, such as his grandson Wang Si, had been removed from their positions and thrown back home. Originally, when they were in the Hanlin Academy, because Wang Si and Yang Chundong had a good personal relationship, he had always suppressed Wang Go and made him suffer. Now, not only had he been promoted, he had also removed the mountain above his head. Next, the first thing Wang Go, who was proud of his position in the government, did was find Yang Duo. He said that he had taken a fancy to the servant girl Xiao Chui and wanted her to warm his room. Xiao Chui was one of the 10 servant girls that Yang Chundong had given to Yang Duo. She was quite beautiful, and Wang Go had also coveted her for a long time. However, she had been sent by Yang Chundong. Even if he had the intention, he did not have the courage. However, now that he had heard that Yang Chundong and Ingzong had died on the battlefield together, he no longer had anything to restrain himself from. Thus, he wanted to show off his power as a man. Yang Duo naturally rejected Wang Go's request. Xiao Chui also threatened to kill herself, saying that if Wang Go touched a single finger of hers, she would die in front of him. If that really happened, it would be inevitable that there would be endless trouble. Wang Go knew that he could not do it. In a fit of anger, he decided to divorce his wife and divorce Yang Duo. At the same time, he married a distant sister of Han Ji as his first wife. During this period of time, because of his sixth brother Yang Chundong, Wang Go's attitude towards Yang Duo had changed. As a woman, and a married woman at that, it was fine if she wanted to live a good life. However, she did not expect that misfortune would descend so quickly. Before she could react, the divorce paper was in front of her. In ancient times, many women divorced their husbands because of emotional discord or other reasons. If it was an amicable divorce, it proved that it was not a woman's problem. Naturally, it would be much easier for the woman to find another man. However, if she was divorced, it was equivalent to carrying a bad reputation for the rest of her life. It would be difficult for her to find a suitable husband. Even if she was married, she would often be looked down upon by her husband's family because of this matter. Accompanied by 10 maids, Yang Duo left the Wang family. She did not even look back because this was the place where she felt sad. After leaving the Wang family, Yang Duo was considered homeless. In the end, she decided to go to the Yang family village. In the village, when she saw Qiao Yin and Madame Shui, who were already waiting there, she burst into tears. The 3 women quickly hugged each other and cried together. The news of Ingzong and the officials' deaths naturally spread to the Yang family village. Qiao Yin and Madame Shui did not know how many times they had cried because of this. Yang Si and Yang Lu, who stayed at home, tried to persuade them, saying that no matter who was in trouble, the young master would be fine. However, this was only taken as comforting words. No one believed them. Even if others did not believe them, Yang Si and Yang Lu were not discouraged. Instead, they met up with the deputy chief of the security bureau, Yang San, who had been active in the capital. After a discussion, the three of them decided that before the young master returned, they had to protect the Yang family village and not allow anyone to cause trouble here. As for Yang Qindong's safety, the three of them did not worry too much about it. No one knew more about the sixth young master's background than they did. Even in the midst of chaos, it was really difficult to hurt the sixth young master with just Tiger's mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, the first guard, and the 100 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard led by Xiao Feng. It was because they firmly believed that Yang Qindong would be fine. The confidence of the three of them soared, and they secretly strengthened the security of the Yang family village. They even decided that if anyone dared to cause trouble here, they would be killed. At the same time, the three of them also decided to temporarily give up on the business of heaven beyond heaven and the immortal abode. They would invite all the important figures in the young master's eyes back to the Yang family village for protection. It was precisely this appropriate action that left some people disappointed, but it also left some people stamping with rage. The one who was stamping with rage was a member of the Yang family. It was Yang Qindong's second brother, Yang Rang. Just like how Wang Go had donated all his money to curry favor with Jin Ing, Yang Rang had chosen to give his sixth brother's businesses, the immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven, to Jin Ing. For this reason, he first went to the palace and handed over a letter of greeting, stating his intentions. Jin Ing was currently in a position of great power. She had to wait on Zhu Qiyu and curry his favor, and she also had to get rid of those who disobeyed her and deal with those who disobeyed her. He was just a trifling sixth-rank official. Wanting to see him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. But when the eunuchs relayed Yang Rang's words, Jin Ing was tempted. The immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven were reputed to be the most profitable businesses in the capital. There were even rumors that the great Ming dynasty's tax revenue couldn't compare to the amount of money earned from these two businesses. Jin Ying's eyes had long since turned red with envy. This was because Yang Qindong and Wang Zhan were on good terms. Even if she wanted to get her hands on them, she couldn't find the opportunity. Now, Yang Qindong's second brother wanted to give these two businesses to her. This was like a meat pie falling from the sky. Jin Ing immediately summoned Yang Rang in the midst of her busy schedule. When Yang Rang saw Jin Ing, he immediately knelt, looking like a servant meeting his master. It seemed like he wanted nothing more than to be Jin Ying's dog. Chapter 144. Jin Ing was naturally overjoyed by this attitude. After all, this person was the son of Yang Rong of the Three Yangs. Him treating him with such respect was definitely a sign of respect. He immediately put on a courteous front and helped Yang Rang to his feet. Afterwards, the host and guests sat together and chatted happily. Yang Rang's attitude was resolute. He had to give the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode to Jin Ing. In response, Jin Ing expressed an appropriate amount of magnanimity. He agreed to take over these two properties, but he wouldn't treat Yang Rang unfairly. He said that he would give him 1/10 of the profits and let him manage them. All he needed to do was ensure the safety of the facilities. Yang Rang was overjoyed by the fact that this negotiation was not going to be taken seriously. After all, 1/10 of the profits was still a lot of money. At that moment, the two of them hit it off. In order to make Yang Rang's operation even smoother, Jin Ing even transferred 2 small banners of the embroidered uniform guards for him to use. Not only that, she also sent her servant, Zhao Xian, to cooperate with him. They had to get the deeds for these 2 places as soon as possible. Before the mission began, Yang Rang's official position was directly promoted from the 6th-rank official of the Ministry of Rights to the 4th-rank official of the Zhan Department. Although this position didn't have much authority, Jin Ing clearly stated that he could continue to be promoted after taking over the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode. He was suddenly promoted from rank 6 to rank 4. This was a qualitative change. Yang Rang's eyes were filled with hope. He even believed that he would have to rely on himself to develop the Yang clan. As for whether or not he'd gotten everything because he'd thrown in his lot with the eunuchs, once he succeeded, who would care about asking so many questions? After leaving the imperial palace, The group of 20 headed straight for the immortal abode. However, when they came here excitedly, they were faced with a closed door. Let's go take a look at the realm beyond heaven. Yang Reng frowned. Everyone went to the neighboring heavens beyond, but it was the same here. It was empty. They could even see the emptiness of the interior through the transparent glass. There were no goods left, not even a guard was left behind. This gave Yang Reng a bad feeling. Although news of Ingzong's defeat had already reached the capital, the new emperor had already ascended to the throne. There weren't any businesses that had closed because of this. Perhaps he had been affected a little, but it wasn't to the extent of not doing it anymore. What's going on? Zhao Xian, Jin Ying's servant, was also agitated by the scene in front of him and asked angrily. Yang Reng hurriedly bowed and revealed a flattering smile. It's fine, it's fine. They must be too cowardly and moved all the goods back to the Yang Qindong manor. We'll go there now. Don't worry, I'm Yang Qindong's second brother and the owner of that place. No one will dare to stop me. That better be the case. Zhao Xian snorted. Even without Zhao Xian saying anything, Yang Reng knew the importance of this matter. Jin Ying was interested in the benefits that the immortal abode and the heavens beyond heaven could bring her, not these two properties. Without the goods and services, these two places were not worth much. Yang Reng's forehead was already covered in cold sweat as he hurriedly led the group of people towards the Yang manor. In the Yang manor, it was as if they were facing a great enemy. Dao Xiao, who had been hiding in the shadows, had already led a small team of 10 people to the open and found a suitable location outside the manor. They were ready to destroy the enemy. In the manor, Yang Si and Yang Lu each held a 95 style sword and kept wiping it and checking their equipment. They knew that in the chaos and with the young master not around, there would definitely be someone who had designs on the Yang manor. However, they did not know who it was. As they waited, a horse carriage entered Dao Zhao's line of sight. Who are you? Stop the carriage. The Yang manor is in front. Unauthorized personnel are not allowed to enter. Dao Xiao jumped out from the bushes by the road and stood in the middle of the road. This was because it was only a horse carriage and he could not see any danger. Otherwise, he would not have appeared so casually. Stop! The coachman shouted and stopped the carriage. Then, the coachman took off the felt hat on his head, revealing a young and valiant face. Brother, I am Sun Chuang, a servant of Minister Hu from the Ministry of Rights. My young lady is in the carriage. Sun Chuang. Dao Xiao knew this name. As one of the captains of the young master's guards, he naturally had to be familiar with certain situations. This was to prevent a flood from flooding the Dragon King's temple. Yes, you know me? Sun Chuang looked at Dao Xiao with a suspicious gaze. As a captain of the embroidered uniform guards, even if he had never seen someone before, he would still have an impression of them. For example, he was sure that he had never met the person in front of him before. Facing Sun Chuang's question, Dao Xiao did not answer. Instead, he shook his head and said, "It is not important whether I know you or not. Who is in the carriage? Please open the curtain and take a look." Who are you? I have been to the Yang manor a few times. Why have I not seen you before? When Sun Chuang heard that he was going to open the curtain, his face revealed a sullen expression. In ancient times, when a young lady went out, she would not easily show her face to outsiders. Otherwise, where would the words reserved and well-bred come from? Seeing that Sun Chuang was questioning him, Dao Xiao replied with a cold laugh, "Forget it. Since you are not willing to open the curtain, please go back." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, indicating for Sun Chuang to drive the carriage away from the Yang manor. Wait. At this moment, a woman's voice came from the carriage. Then, the window opened, revealing Hu Yan's peerless face. However, at this moment, her face was filled with anxiety. Her face was not as rosy as before, but rather pale. Who was Hu Yan? She was Yang Qindong's future wife candidate. As one of the captains of the guards, how could Dao Xiao not know her? When he raised his head and saw that it was indeed this young lady, he immediately lowered his head and clasped his hands together. Sorry for the offense. This is a critical time. Please forgive me. You should go back quickly. After Dao Xiao knew who was in the carriage, he did not even have the courage to look at her. He no longer had the stern look he had before. Instead, He lowered his eyes and looked like a little wife who had been bullied. In Hu Yan's eyes, this performance actually caused her to unconsciously feel joy in her heart. These were the people by the Dong Shuai's side. They were always so respectful to her. They were even more respectful to her than the people in the Hu clan. Officer's son, drive the carriage. Hu Yin collected her thoughts and lowered the curtain. Then, her voice rang out. Dao Xiao stepped aside to open the path behind him. When he turned around, he made a gesture that no one else could understand. However, Yang Si and Yang Lu, who were in the manor, saw it clearly. They knew that young mistress who had arrived. The door to the inner courtyard of the manor immediately opened. The carriage continued to move as usual. In the carriage, Xiao Qing hugged Hu Yan's arm tightly and said with a worried tone, "Young lady, we just left the Hu clan like this. Will Master be angry if he finds out?" "So what if he's angry? I was born to be the Dong Shuai's woman and die to be his ghost. If he wants me to go back, he can only do it as a corpse," Hu Yan said with a determined expression. Ever since Shi Hong returned to the capital and news of Yingzhong and the hundreds of officials dying in battle spread, Hu Yan had shed countless tears. When she could no longer cry, she made a bold decision. She came to the Yang clan manor and lived here as Yang Qindong's wife. The two of them did not go through any ceremony. They did not even make any basic promises. When Yang Qindong left the capital, he did not even say goodbye. Logically speaking, when Hu Yan married someone else, she would not make any moral mistakes. However, she still made this decision. From this, it could be seen that she really liked Yang Qindong. She did not covet his ability to earn money and wanted to become a rich wife. In front of Xiao Qing, she expressed her attitude once again. Hu Yan thought of Sun Chuang and asked with a concerned tone, "Xiao Qing, you asked Officer Sun to send us out this time. Have you made plans for the future?" "I have." At this time, it was Xiao Qing's turn to reveal a determined expression. "I have already talked to him. In the future, we will follow Mississippi. As for whether Master will punish us or not, we will accept whatever the result is." This "he" was naturally referring to Sun Chuang. It was also because of love that Sun Chuang promised Xiao Qing to help her leave the Hu clan and come to the Yang clan manor. This was the result of love. However, at that time, this kind of love was not looked favorably upon. Sun Chuang also had another identity. He was the officer of the embroidered uniform guards and Hu Changning's personal servant. Based on the fact that he had a private relationship with Xiao Qing without his master's permission, even if he was killed at that time, no one would say anything. Xiao Qing's complexion was not very good. Although her words were very firm, her whole body seemed to be trembling. It could be seen that she was afraid. Hu Yan patted the back of her hand and said, "Xiao Qing, don't be afraid. Mrs. here. If father punishes you, I will take responsibility." Mississippi, the touched Xiao Qing was about to cry. She was not moved because Hu Yan was standing up for her. In fact, if something really happened, as a miss, she could not help much. She was moved because Hu Yan's feelings for her were not like that of a servant girl, but like a sister. The two were hugging each other when the inner gate of the Yang clan manor opened. Xiaoyin, Madame Shui, and Yang Duo, who had heard the news, came out to welcome them. Madame Xiang was also in the backyard. Seeing these people coming out, her eyes were full of envy. Cui Na saw it clearly. "What? Sister, are you envious?" "I'm envious," Lady Xiang replied without any hesitation. "Even if Dong Shuai can't come back, or even if he is dead, do you still envy them? You know, you are now a good girl and a virgin. If you want to marry in the future, you will not suffer too much." Cui Na knew that Madame Xiang liked the sixth young master, but had not been accepted. At that time, she felt injustice for her. Why could other people become Dong Shuai's woman? What was the difference between Madame Xiang's appearance and figure? Chapter 145. But now, after learning that Yang Qindong might have died on the battlefield, she felt a little lucky for some reason. One of the advantages was that she didn't give herself to Dong Shuai too early. But she didn't expect that Lady Xiang was still envious of Lady Shui and Lady Qiaoyin. No. Lady Shui shook her head firmly after hearing Cui Na's words. "You can't find a man as outstanding as Dong Shuai in the whole world. Even if he's dead, I'm already his woman in Han Xiang's heart. As she spoke, her eyes couldn't stop tearing up. Obviously, it was too late for regrets at this moment. If she had known this would happen, she would have given herself to Dong Shuai. It would have been better than regretting it for the rest of her life. Let's not talk about how the women would welcome Hu Yin and how they would cry when they saw each other. Let's talk about the group of people outside the Yang village. They were a group of unusual guests. The reason why they were said to be uninvited guests was because they all had excited expressions on their faces. Moreover, they didn't seem to have any intention of stopping when they entered the Yangjia village. Stop! The gate of the village opened, and Yang Si strode out to welcome them. While they were still far away, he fired the 95 style in his hand into the sky. Bang! The crisp sound immediately shocked the group from afar. Then, the sound of horses reining in their horses sounded one after another. From this point alone, it could be seen that people were afraid of death, especially those who seemed to be awe-inspiring. They often cherished their lives more and were the most timid. Yang Rang and Zhao Xian were riding at the front. The sudden gunshot really frightened them. They reined in their horses in a hurry and almost lost control of their bodies and fell from their horses. Twisting their bodies, they dismounted from their horses. Their faces were as unsightly as they could be. When Zhao Xian's feet finally landed safely on the ground, he pointed to the front with a flustered and exasperated face and said, "Who are they? How can they have firearms in their hands? Where are the laws of the great Ming dynasty?" It was no wonder that Zhao Xian was so angry. Firearms were important weapons of the imperial court, and they wouldn't be shown to people easily. Even the 3 firearm battalions were very strict with the management of firearms. Unless they had the special permission of the emperor and the Ministry of War, it was difficult for anyone to take them out. But now, this thing had unexpectedly appeared in the Yang village. How could they not be shocked, angry, and indignant? The more Yang rang, the more angry he was. But he didn't know these things. In order to calm Yang's anger, he kept nodding and said, "Mr. Zhao, don't be angry. I'll ask them what's going on." As he spoke, Yang Rang turned to look at Yang Si, who was standing at the entrance of the Yang family's inner courtyard with a firearm. Instead of acting like a grandson, he roared like a master. "Who are you? How dare you block our path? Do you know who I am?" "I'm Stings. What's the reason for entering the village without permission?" Facing the imposing Yang Rang, Yang Si naturally wasn't afraid. Even though he had already recognized that this person was the 6th young master's second brother. But at this time, he had brought so many embroidered uniform guards with him. His purpose was as clear as day. With regards to his own brother trying to steal the 6th young master's wife, he was no longer a member of the Yang family in his eyes. So why should he be polite? Yang Rang heard that he was just a servant, and it sounded so sarcastic. Since when did a servant dare to show off in front of his master? He didn't know how his 6th brother usually managed things. How could he not distinguish between master and servant? Humph! How dare a little servant hold a firearm? Let me tell you, you've already violated the laws of the great Ming dynasty. Now kneel and beg for mercy. For the sake of my 6th brother, I'll only kill you. I won't implicate the others in the village." Yang Rang seemed to be magnanimous, but unknowingly, he had already placed himself in the position of the head of the Yang family village. When the other servants heard their master's words, they must have been terrified. But this was Yang Si. He even beat up the messenger of the Walla. How could he shrink back because of these words? He first shook his head, and then with a trace of disdain in his eyes, he said, "First, how I got the firearm is none of your business. Second, a man can only live standing, not kneeling. Third, nothing will happen to the 6th young master, let alone die. Your so-called 6th brother is simply nonsense." The rebuttals entered his ears one by one. Zhao Xian's expression changed greatly, and he added fuel to the fire. "Master Yang? Are these the servants of the Yang family? How can they be so rude?" Zhao Xian's words were like a heavy hammer, and Yang Rang's face was as red as a monkey's butt. Ever since he was a child, no one had ever insulted him like this since he learned that he was Yang Rong. But now, in front of a servant, and in front of a servant of the Yang family, he was being laughed at. How could he hold back his anger? Immediately, He looked at Yang Si with eyes that were spitting fire. As the second master of the Yang family, I order you to kneel and beg for mercy immediately. Otherwise, I'll exterminate 3 generations of your family. He even said something like exterminating 3 generations of his family. It could be seen how angry and hateful he was at this moment. If looks could eat people, Yang Si would have been eaten by Yang Rang countless times. Yang Rang roared furiously. At this time, Yang Rang did not look like a scholar at all. Looking at him, it really gave people a terrifying feeling. Yang Si was not an ordinary person, let alone an ordinary person. If shouting could make him submit, then Yang Qindong's previous hellish training would really be useless. At this moment, he was completely unfazed by Yang Rang's towering rage. He was still as calm and collected as ever, as if these words were not directed at him. He was just a bystander watching others put on a show. Seeing that Beta Persei was so angry, but the person opposite him did not have the slightest intention of retreating, Zhao Xian did not put his hopes on him. Instead, he turned to the brocade guards beside him and said, "Go. I'll leave this place to you. Since some people don't know what's good for them, there's no need to keep them." Zhao Xian's murderous intent was out, and he decided to suppress everything with bloody martial arts. Perhaps there were times when reasoning was useless. Whoever had the bigger fist would be the one who had the final say. However, the one who had the biggest fist was not Zhao Xian, but Yang Si, who held the 95 style. Ever since he followed Yang Qindong, he rarely had the chance to touch a gun. After all, once a gunshot was heard, it would inevitably attract the attention of all parties. Only when he really wanted to do it, would he ask for leave from Tiger's Mane and go to Foul Crow Mountain Forest, which was more than 10 miles away from Yang Village, to shoot a few shots. And now, the opportunity to shoot was given to him. How could Yang Si not grasp it well? There was a hint of slyness in his eyes, and he revealed a playful expression. When he saw the brocade guards start to run towards him, he raised his hand and pulled the trigger with his finger. A crisp bang sound was heard. The second gunshot caused the embroidered uniform guards who were running forward to stop. Based on their instincts, they knew that there was danger ahead. What are you afraid of? He's only one person with a firearm. There are so many of you. How can that firearm fire continuously? Zhao Xian's shout came from behind. Although he was also very curious, he did not see Yang Si fill the gun with gunpowder and fire a second shot. However, relying on the fact that there were so many people, he still shouted with full confidence. His shout seemed to have given the embroidered uniform guards courage. Thinking that the opponent was indeed only one person with a firearm, and that there were more than 20 of them, what was there to be afraid of? After looking at each other, they gathered their courage and continued to run forward. Yang Si's mouth slightly twitched. He was clearly very happy, but he still pretended to be helpless as he muttered, "You forced me to do this. Hee, then let's see who's stronger and see if there are people in this world who aren't afraid of death." The 95 style was raised, and it was a stark contrast to the previous frivolous attitude. At this moment, Yang Si was incomparably serious. His eyes were like an eagle's as he stared at the leg of the brocade guard running at the front. His right index finger lightly moved, and his shoulder was rebounded by the recoil of the firearm. In the next second, the bullet spun out of the barrel and accurately landed on the thigh of the brocade guard. Bang! The person fell. Their coordination was extremely synchronized. Bang bang! After this shot, Yang Si fired 2 more bullets. 3 brocade guards fell to the ground one after another. Even though they fell to the ground, they did not forget to cry out in pain. At the same time, they rolled on the ground to show what kind of pain they were experiencing. This scene also frightened the others. At this moment, the brocade guards could not help but stop. Then, it was unknown who took the lead, but after a shout, they all ran back in the direction of Zhao Xian. At this moment, Zhao Xian was also scared silly. He completely forgot to urge the brocade guards to continue their charge. This was the first time he saw a firearm that could fire continuously. Moreover, it was so accurate and so fast. All of this was beyond his understanding. The fleeing brocade guards returned to Zhao Xian's side. Then, they all looked at Yang Si with frightened eyes. It was as if he was a murderous demon. It made people afraid, terrified, and powerless. How is it? Do you still want to charge? Looking at the three people on the ground, Yang Si seemed to be very satisfied with his masterpiece. He even whistled happily. Then, his face became serious again and he said, I already said that you are not allowed to charge into the Yang family manor. You just didn't listen. Now, this is the result of your own actions. Immediately take the injured people away and scram. Chapter 146. Yang Si raised his hand and fired again. The bullet hit the back of Zhao Xian's saber, and the powerful force sent the saber flying. This shot also completely woke Zhao Xian up. He was so scared that he knelt on the ground with a plop. At the same time, his whole body was trembling. Taking a closer look, his crotch was wet. This was what people called peeing. There was a distance of 60 steps. Not only could the firearm hit, but it also hit with such precision. This made the other embroidered uniform guards completely deflate. At the same time, they finally knew what kind of person they were facing. Just now, they wanted to win with numbers. If it wasn't for this person showing mercy, they didn't know if any of them would be able to return alive. What are you looking at? Why aren't you taking the injured people away? Do you want to see them die? Yang Si saw that the enemy had been scared out of their wits and let out a fierce roar. This roar gave all the embroidered uniform guards a big fright. At the same time, it made them run forward again. They picked up their three injured companions who were still rolling on the ground and retreated. The shot that hit the saber completely extinguished Zhao Xian's arrogance. No one would have thought that when he finally left, he would actually bow and smile as he retreated step by step. Perhaps he had done too many bad things and was worried that Yang Si would suddenly appear behind him and take his life. When the group came, they were aggressive. But when they left, they were dejected, creating a sharp contrast. Only when they were some distance away from the Yangjia Manor's gate did Zhao Xian and the other embroidered uniform guards sit on the ground with a plop, gasping for breath. Thinking back to the scene just now, it was like taking a trip to the gates of hell. To be able to return alive, it was the accumulated merit of their ancestors. Who knew how long they had been gasping for? After finally calming down, Yang Rang asked Zhao Xian with lingering fear, Mr. Zhao, what should we do next? He has such a powerful firearm in his hand. It seems that we won't be a match for him. Why don't we bring more people? Like you said, they only have one firearm. We have more people. As long as we rush in front of them, victory will be ours. Forget it. There is something fishy about this matter. I have to report it to Eunuch before making a decision. Zhao Xian shook his head. He saw how powerful the 9.5 was, and because of this, he became greedy. He thought about how powerful such a good firearm would be if he could get his hands on it. At that time, if anyone was dissatisfied with him, he would just raise his head and shoot them. No matter how powerful a person was, they would not be a match for this thing. Zhao Xian had the thought of pocketing for himself, so he naturally would not let others know. In order to appease Yang Rang, he deliberately said, Master Beta Persei, you can go back first. I will report everything that happened to my father-in-law. You just have to wait for the news. Oh, Yang Rang did not doubt him. After all, Zhao Xian was Jin Ying's servant. They had a close relationship. Since Zhao Xian had said so, he could only choose to believe him. The two parted ways after entering the outer city of the capital. Zhao Xian did indeed go to see his master, Jian Ying, but he did not tell her what had happened. He only said that because they had suffered a defeat, the people of the immortal abode were extremely afraid. They needed some time to calm down before they could do business as usual and earn money again. He would follow up on this matter. Perhaps Jian Ying trusted her servant Zhao Xian completely, or perhaps it was because she had too much work to do. In any case, she believed his words and did not ask any further questions. After leaving, Zhao Xian immediately began to search for some ruffians in the city. There was no lack of desperados among these people. As long as they were given enough money and benefits, there was nothing they did not dare to do. In just 2 days, Zhao Xian had gathered a group of nearly 50 people. After promising that if they went to the Yang family manor to retrieve something, each person would receive 100 taels of silver, these people all followed his lead and were willing to listen to his arrangements. In order to achieve a surefire success, Zhao Xian decided to take action at night. That afternoon, He led these people out of the southern part of the city to make preparations for the operation at night. Just when he thought that no one knew what he was doing, and was even thinking of offering the weapon to his master, Jianing, the benefits he would receive would not be small. The people of the Security Bureau had been watching his every move for the past few days. As soon as they left the city gates, the news was reported to the deputy director, Yang San. As the deputy director, he was actually the leader of the Security Bureau. After training, Yang San had become much more mature, both mentally and mentally. As soon as he received the news, he quickly analyzed that this was a sign that Zhao Xian was about to make a move. After injuring the 3 embroidered uniform guards, the Yang clan manor had entered a state of emergency. They had even prepared for a large group of embroidered uniform guards to attack the manor. Under Yang San, Yang Si, and Yang Lu's joint plan, they even prepared a rocket launcher, a highly destructive weapon, just in case. Unexpectedly, for the past 2 days, it had been very peaceful outside the manor. After investigation, they found out that Zhao Xian had other plans. He probably did not report the situation truthfully to his master, Jianing. This could be seen from the fact that he had privately spent a lot of money to move the 3 injured embroidered uniform guards together for treatment. He wanted to hide something and wanted to play a big game of chess. But what did he want to do? Yang San and the others were only suspicious. All they did was send people to keep an eye on him. Now that there was finally news, as the deputy director, he slapped his thigh and said, "This Zhao Xian's appetite is not small. He wants to destroy the Yang clan manor privately, but he doesn't know how much weight he has." Yang San was really angry. He had clearly seen the power of firearms, but he still wanted to bring 50 people to attack the manor. How bold was he? He must have thought that the Yang clan manor only had one such advanced and powerful firearm. It must be so. Even though his thoughts were so childish, he still dared to have such ambition. Such a person could not be left alive. Yang San immediately made the decision to take the initiative to attack and get rid of Zhao Xian and his group. He also hurriedly sent his suggestion to Yang Si and Yang Lu. 60 miles northeast of Shangshi Yuzhou, a group of people was resting in the mountains. In order to prevent others from discovering their tracks, they did not even dare to start a fire. In the mountains, from a high vantage point, one could see the official road and the majestic Zijing Pass not far away. Naturally, they saw the Walla army knocking on the pass. Why are there enemies here? Could it be that our great Ming has fallen into the hands of the enemy? In the crowd, Zhu Qizhen, who was wearing a tiger's armor, looked very miserable with his hair disheveled. At this moment, when he saw the Walla army that was breaking through the pass, there was a hint of fear and worry between his brows. Ever since he was saved by Yang Chendong, Zhu Qizhen's courage had become much smaller. Along the way, he encountered a few small Walla teams. The scene of them fighting and killing the enemy made him see the fragility of human life. Even though they were all killed by the cold front led by Xiao Feng from a distance, every time they cleaned up the battlefield, when they walked up and saw the various miserable conditions of the corpses, it still hammered his heart time and time again. In the imperial court in the palace, he would sometimes receive military reports saying that there was a rebellion at a certain place, that there was an enemy at a certain place, and that many soldiers had died in the process. But that was just a number that was forgotten after hearing it. How could it have such a deep impression? He had seen too many scenes and seen too many dead people. Zhu Qizhen secretly decided that he would just obediently stay in the palace in the future. It was more appropriate to leave the matters of war to the generals. An emperor who was skilled in both the pen and the sword sounded good, but it was not so easy to do it. Most importantly, he was not made for this. Along the way, Zhu Qizhen saw himself more clearly. This was something that Yang Chendong did not expect. With history already beginning to change, no one knew if this change in Zhu Qizhen's mental state was good or bad. It was also because of Zhu Qizhen that this group did not travel very quickly. This was especially true after passing through Yuzhou and getting closer and closer to the capital. This was not because he was afraid of returning home. It was simply because he knew that he was safe. As the emperor, Zhu Qizhen, had begun to put on airs. In the absence of any threat to his life, his body began to rebel and display various signs of discomfort. As he walked faster, his body began to develop all sorts of small problems. They were no longer on the run, so no one could forcefully do anything to the emperor. They could only carefully accompany him. However, they had only traveled less than 100 miles in 3 days, and this was under the condition that they were riding on healthy horses. This ant-like crawling speed made Yang Chendong extremely anxious. In the Battle of the Timu Fortress, Yang Chendong did not interfere too much, or perhaps it could be said that he did not have the authority or opportunity to interfere too much. Only when the situation was settled and chaos descended did he strike with lightning speed to complete his plan. Yang Chendong, who had long known what would happen, had calculated everything beforehand and made all his arrangements come into use. At present, everything seemed to be going according to plan, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But Zhu Qijian's speed was truly beyond his expectations. If this continued, it would take at least 7 or 8 days, perhaps even longer, to reach the capital. He had always been worried about the safety of the people in the Yang clan manor, so he decided that he could not wait any longer. He had to strike ahead of time. Passively waiting had never been something that Yang Chendong was willing to do. Even though the Yang clan manor had Yang Si, Yang Lu, Dao Xiao, and the others, as well as the phantom sniper squad in the shadows, they were still a force to be reckoned with. With these people, unless an army invaded, ordinary attacks would not be able to harm them. But there was always an exception. History had long ago proven that unexpected things would happen from time to time. In order to avoid the possibility of an accident, he needed to return to the capital as quickly as possible. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.